earth always obeyed men until man got in agreement with Satan. When man is in agreement with Satan, then Satan's in charge of the earth. Storms are created by demons. Study your Bible. So the devil is the one that creates storms and earthquakes and all this stuff to destroy man. But the hedge of protection that God allows to happen because man is in agreement with the God that wants him destroyed. Satan, the God of this world, they're in agreement with him.
Yahshar'el, we blame Yah for a lot of stuff, and we wrongfully accuse Yah because we were taught lies. These storms and hurricanes are not from Yah. They are demonic and are done through their evil inventions. Scripture says, far be it from Yah to destroy the righteous with the wicked. Yah will never destroy his righteous people. Yahshar'el, let's bring Yah's truth according to his word and reveal that it is the enemy and his seed that are behind these evils, not Yah. Blessings in the mighty name of Yahushua HaMashiach. Yahshar'el, ever wondered why they call natural disasters acts of God? As to say Yah is the one behind these natural disasters? Do you believe this to be true? Let me ask you this, Yahshar'el. Do you believe that storms are sent by the Most High? Do you believe that Yah uses the storms and hurricanes to judge us and to teach us a lesson? What if I told you that storms can be caused by evil spirits, and hurricanes are storms that have been enhanced through evil inventions given to the devil's seed by fallen angels? It is fallen angel knowledge that is being used, and we call these things technology. It is the same thing happening all over again, Yahshar'el, as in the days of Noah, when the fallen angels gave knowledge to the descendants of Cain to do all kinds of evil and to make all sorts of evil inventions. So it is today, Yahshar'el. These storms and hurricanes are not from Yah. Did you know that most tropical cyclones are formed off the west coast of Africa, where the slave coast was, and that it travels the same path where the slave ships traveled? Do you think this is a coincidence? Certainly not. Have you ever looked into how they tell us how hurricanes are formed? It doesn't make sense, Yahshar'el, and it goes against what Yah says. Let me ask you this. Do you think man can geoengineer the weather?
We shall propose further cooperative efforts between all the nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control.
It lays the predicate foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Don't worry if you can't hear what I'm saying. I couldn't even hear myself. This is the loudest sound you could possibly conceive. And, as it turns out, the cleanest. Now, the most amazing thing is that that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. I told you. It's raining. That's unbelievable. Oh. NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.
Yahshar'el, our weather is completely being geoengineered, and they are the ones warming up the waters, ionizing the atmosphere, causing storms and hurricanes through their evil inventions, and calling it climate change. It is nothing but a big fat lie. Join me, Yahshar'el, as we will ask the Ruach Ha'Qodesh to lead us into all truth according to what the scripture says. Let scripture interpret scriptures, not religion, not churchianity, not your pastor, not your beloved YouTuber, or the person you idolize, and surely not your emotions. Let's expose their wicked indoctrination and bring Yah's truth to his people. Hallelujah! All praise to Abba Yah. Let's begin, Yahshar'el. So Yahshar'el, I ask again, do you think they can geoengineer the weather?
Can we engineer the weather? Cloud seeding is a form of weather modification that can produce what we want more or less of, more rain or snow, or even smaller hail pellets. China is building the world's largest weather modification system to artificially enhance rain that will cover an area of over 2.1 million square miles by 2025. Today, at least 52 countries across the globe are using some sort of weather modification program. While it may sound too good to be true, the technology has been around for more than 75 years. Clouds are made up of tiny water droplets. Groups of droplets form water vapor, or ice crystals. By itself, this water vapor isn't dense enough to fall to the ground as precipitation. Instead, it rises until it becomes supercooled and condenses around tiny particles of dust in the sky, called condensation nuclei. It takes billions of these condensed water droplets to form a visible cloud. In cloud seeding, a seeding agent is used as the condensation nuclei. Typical seeding agents are chemicals such as silver iodide, potassium iodide, or solid carbon dioxide. These are shot into clouds by rockets or sprayed into clouds using drones or aircraft. Unattached supercooled water vapor molecules in the clouds condense around these particles. The condensed water vapor droplets then group together, becoming larger and heavier. This process continues until the droplets are large enough to fall as rain. Recently, the UAE created artificial rain using drones. These drones targeted certain clouds with electrical discharges through concentrated lasers to force water droplets to pool in the air, triggering the desired rainfall. Today, the largest cloud seeding system in the world is found in China. China creates 55 billion tons of artificial rain a year. Other countries are also looking to ramp up cloud seeding efforts in the hope of increasing precipitation. Thailand has an ambitious aim to remove water shortages in 98% of the country's drought-affected areas by 2037. The idea behind cloud seeding is to create rain in regions that are most affected by droughts, thus reducing the impact of droughts. In 2015, cloud seeding increased the local rainfall in Texas by about 34%. The technology can also be used to manage hail. According to an estimate, hailstorms in the U.S. cause an average of $15 billion in damage to homes, cars, and crops each year. Cloud seeding increases the number of ice pellets in hail-producing clouds, but decreases the size of each pellet. This can reduce the damage caused by hail. Cloud seeding can also clear away fog by turning it into precipitation, improving visibility around airports. But there is a catch. For cloud seeding to work, specific atmospheric conditions must exist. Cloud seeding can't create clouds. It can only add particles to clouds which interact with the water vapor already present in the air. Also, cloud seeding does not always go as planned. In 2009, China performed cloud seeding in an attempt to end a drought. resulting in a temperature drop and a snowstorm that closed roads around Beijing. There are also concerns about unwanted ecological changes. Rain in one area might bring drought to another, which could lead to ecological imbalances. After all, water that falls from the sky must go somewhere. If that extra precipitation falls in a place where it cannot be absorbed into the ground, then it could trigger flooding. Today, water shortages and floods affect every continent. Around 1.2 billion people, or almost 1/5 of the world's population, live in water-scarce areas. Another 500 million people face intermittent scarcity, and around 1.47 billion are directly exposed to the risk of intense flooding.
John chapter 1 verse 4 reads, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehend it not." Yahshar'el, it says in Yahusha was life, and the life in Yahusha was the light of men. Verse 5 says the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehend it not. The purpose of light is to show up what is hidden in the dark. Light exposes darkness, and it reveals Yah's truth. And this is what Yahusha did. He did not only redeem us from sin and to give us the promise of the Father, which is the infilling of the Ruach Ha'Qodesh. Yahusha also came to expose the darkness of this world, because the enemy has blinded us from Yah's truth. We are taught to do the wrong things, and as a result, we remain in the dark because we don't understand the light that Yahusha has come to show us. The scripture says in verse 9 that Yahusha is the true light. This means that whatever Yahusha said and whatever he did was of true light. And praise Yah for that, for we need that light so we can have life. Everything Yahusha did, Yahshar'el, exposed the enemy for who he is. But if we fail to understand this, the devil will keep us in his darkness and cause us not to find that life, which is Yahusha. No, let's allow the true light to show us that storms are spiritual. Let me ask you this, Yahshar'el. Have you ever wondered why Yahusha rebuked the storm? Why didn't he just command the sea and say, "Peace, be still"? Why did the scripture say he rebuked the storm? Was he giving light into this situation? Let's go to Mark chapter 4, reading from verse 35. Yahshar'el, the story of Yahusha rebuking the storm can be found in the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and I encourage you to read them to get the full picture. Mark chapter 4 verse 35 says, "And the same day when the even was come, he said unto them, Let us pass over unto the other side." Yahshar'el, keep this verse in mind. Yahusha said, "Let us pass over unto the other side." Everything that Yahusha did was significant and gave light into situations for us to understand and was an example to us. So we may come to know the truth and have the true knowledge, not the lies and the false knowledge according to this world. Verse 36 says, "And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship. And there was also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And he was in the inner part of the ship asleep on a pillow. And they awake him and said unto him, Rabbi, do you not care that we perish? And he arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Yahshar'el, scripture says a great storm of wind arose. And when you read the same account in Matthew chapter 8, verse 24, it says there arose a great tempest, which is interpreted as an earthquake in the sea, and the ship was covered with waves. Both the earthquake and the storm were formed by evil spirits. Let's prove this. Yahshar'el, Have you ever examined all the occasions in which Yahusha used the word rebuke? Well, anytime Yahusha himself uses the word rebuke, it is always in the context of him rebuking demons, devils, or unclean spirits. This means that there was an evil spirit behind the storm, and that is why Yahusha rebuked the demon behind the storm. Matthew chapter 17, where the son that was a lunatic, that is to say he was epileptic, verse 18 says Yahusha rebuked the devil, and it departed from the boy, and he was cured. Mark chapter 1, verse 25 to 26 says Yahusha rebuked the unclean spirit out of the man in the synagogue. Mark chapter 8, verse 33 says Yahusha rebuked Kepha, which is Peter in your King James, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you savor not the things that be of Elohim, but the things that be of men." Are you seeing this, Yahshar'el? Yahusha rebuked the Satan that was working through Peter. Let me say this, Yahshar'el. Many times ideas come to us, and we think it is of Yah, or it is our own thoughts. Guess what? Sometimes it is the devil that placed those thoughts in your head. They have blinded us and kept us in the dark with their many lies, Yahshar'el, and have explained away Yah's truth, saying that when someone is epileptic, it is a disorder of the brain. Nothing but a big fat lie. It is demonic. Many of the things that we accept as normal are actually the doings of evil spirits, but we are trained to reject the true light. This darkness that we have been given has prevented us from having the life that Yahusha came to give us. I will continue to say it, Yahshar'el. We will never receive all of Yah's goodness if we accept their lies over the word of Yah. If Yah says it is so, then we must accept it. Let us say and do what Yahusha says, for he is the true light. I will explain the details in the Balaam effect part 3. So, Yahshar'el, Yahusha rebuked Satan that was behind Peter, the same thing he did when he rebuked the storm. Mark chapter 9 verse 25 says Yahusha rebuked the foul spirit, which was a dumb and deaf spirit. So foul spirits can cause someone to be deaf and dumb, yet the doctors and the scientists tells us in every case that these are abnormalities. Let's follow the true light, Yahshar'el, and not these liars. Luke chapter 4 verse 35 says Yahusha rebuked the unclean devil from the man in the synagogue. Luke 4:38 to 39 says Simon's mother-in-law was taken with a great fever, and Yahusha rebuked the fever and it left her, which means that the fever came as a result of a demon. Luke chapter 9 verse 42 says the son that had epilepsy, the demon threw and tear the boy, and Yahusha rebuked that unclean spirit, and the child was healed. Luke 9 verse 52 to 55 explains that Yahusha went into a village of the Samaritans, and they received him not. And when the disciples James and John saw this, they told Yahusha to call down fire to consume the village, and Yahusha rebuked them. Verse 55 says, "But he turned and rebuked them, and said, Ye know not what manner of Ruach spirit ye are of." Yahusha said they knew not what spirit was speaking through them. Same thing that happened with Kepha, Peter. So Yahusha rebuked them because they were of another spirit. That is to say, the thought that they spoke was from an unclean spirit. Verse 56 says, "For the Son of Adam is not come to destroy men's life, but to save them." The Most High will never send disasters upon the righteous for the sake of the wicked. Abraham said that far be it that Yahuwah will destroy the righteous with the wicked. Hallelujah! That is what is killing us, Yahshar'el. We don't understand the nature and the characteristics of Yah. We don't know Yah. And when the evil is happening, we blame the Most High and we believe it is Yah's doing, or he allows it. But let me tell you this, Yah will never destroy the righteous with the wicked. Let me repeat, Yah will never destroy the righteous with the wicked. But you might say, Yah judges, and I would say, I agree with you. Yes, the Most High judges, for he is just, but there is a way in which the Most High carries out his judgments. We'll explain that further in the teaching. So Yahshar'el, all throughout the gospel, when Yahusha used the word rebuked, it was always pertaining to demons, devils, and unclean spirits. Yahusha rebuked the storm because the storm was caused by a spirit. Let me show you this. Let's go to Luke chapter 18, verse 40 to 43. Yahshar'el, this is when Yahusha healed a certain blind man by the wayside on their way to Jericho. And the blind man cried out, Yahusha, son of David, have mercy on me. Let's read what Yahusha did. And Yahusha stood and commanded him to be brought unto him. And when he was come near, he asked him, saying, What will you that I shall do unto you? And he said, Adonai, that I may receive my sight. And Yahusha said unto him, Receive your sight, your faith has saved you. And immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying Elohim. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise unto Elohim. Yahshar'el, Yahusha said to the blind man, Receive your sight, and immediately he received his sight. Why didn't Yahusha rebuke the blindness like how he did with the boy that was epileptic? It was because the epilepsy was caused by a demonic spirit. So it is today, Yahshar'el. Our enemies have taught us lies. Many of us are praying away that high blood pressure like it's a demon. It is how you eat. You might be influenced by a spirit on how to eat. And you also have these demonic spirits influencing the wicked to put all sorts of stuff in our food. But the sickness of high blood pressure is not demonic, yet you are rebuking it. Eat how you should eat and it will go away. Someone that is bipolar or mentally ill, we say it is a mental disorder when it is demonic. We don't know how to differentiate between these things because we are not taking the knowledge from the true light. So Yahusha rebuking the storm is to show us that the storm was demonic. Let's go back to Mark chapter 4. Yahshar'el, remember in verse 35 when Yahusha said, Let us go over to the other side? Well, Yahusha is telling us a lot here. Yahusha said, Let us go to the other side. When they were going to the other side, out of nowhere a storm came. Yahusha rebuked the storm. And verse 41 says, When they saw what Yahusha did, they said, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? But what was on the other side, Yahshar'el? Mark chapter 5 verse 1 to 2 tells us what was on the other side. It was a man with an unclean spirit. Did you catch that? Yahusha rebuked the storm and we missed the understanding. Yahusha was showing us that behind the storm there was an evil spirit, and that is why he rebuked the storm. Did you catch that? No. The rest of the story tells us that Yahusha rebuked the unclean spirit, and there were many, hence they are called legion. That is not a coincidence, Yahshar'el. The story goes to say that the demons were sent into the pigs, and the pigs went into the sea. The demons went into the sea. The sea where storms and hurricanes are formed. Are you seeing this? Watch this, Yahshar'el. Ephesians chapter 2 verse 2 reads, Where in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. Yahshar'el, it says the prince of the power of the air. The prince here is a principality. It is a spirit. How do we know? It says the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 12 tells us we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. The shortening of principality is prince. These are spirits. So again, scripture says this prince has power over the air. Churchianity tells us this is talking about music, but that is a lie. Let's look at the Greek word for air.
Strong's G 109. Aer.
It says the air, particularly the lower and denser air as distinguished from the higher and rarer air, the atmospheric region. Are you seeing this, Yahshar'el? Please tell me you are seeing this. The principality has the power over the air, the atmospheric region. But which region specifically? It says particularly the lower and denser air. This is the first atmospheric region that they call the troposphere. And this is where weather conditions are formed. Watch this.
The troposphere is the first layer of Earth's atmosphere. It starts on the planet's surface and stretches up to an average of 7 miles in the air. This layer is the densest, meaning it has more particles and heavier gases than the other levels. The majority of Earth's weather occurs within the troposphere. This layer is also the warmest at the bottom, as it is closer to the heat that the Earth is absorbing from the sun. As you go farther up into the troposphere, the temperature drops.
Yahshar'el, did you get that? The troposphere is where the air is lower and denser, and there is a principality over this atmospheric region. And there are many verses in the Bible that confirms this. Now, before I get into hurricanes, I know the scriptures explains that the Most High uses storms. But what we fail to realize is that the Most High doesn't work like how the devils work. Yah will never punish the righteous with the wicked. He will never punish the righteous to get to the wicked. The enemy, however, will destroy the righteous with the wicked. He cares for no one. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 29. Isaiah 29 verse 6 reads, You shall be visited of Yahuwah of hosts with thunder and with earthquake and great noise, with storm and tempest and the flame of devouring fire. Yahshar'el, it says Yahuwah uses thunder, earthquakes, great noise with storms and tempests, and we can see examples of these in scriptures. However, what we fail to realize and understand is how Yahuwah uses these things. Let's reveal it so you can know the difference. Nahum chapter 1 verse 2 to 3 reads, El is jealous, and Yahuwah revenges. Yahuwah revenges and is furious. Yahuwah will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies. Yahuwah is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. Yahuwah has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. Yahshar'el, it says Yahuwah has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm. But who is it for, Yahshar'el? Verse 2 says Yahuwah revenges. He is furious. He will take vengeance. Who will he do these things against, Yahshar'el? It says on his adversaries. He reserves his wrath against his enemies. Are you seeing this, Yahshar'el? Yah's judgment is against the wicked. Far be it that Yahuwah will destroy the righteous with the wicked. Hallelujah. Yah's judgment is for the wicked. When these storms hit, like what Beryl did the other day, doesn't it affect both the righteous and the wicked? Of course. As a matter of fact, the wicked are more secure because most of them have money, resources, and have their private jet to fly out of the country. It is mostly the wicked that can afford big expensive houses with storm shutters, while the poor and the righteous lives and property are at risk of being lost or damaged. Yah will never judge the wicked at the expense of the righteous. So anyone that says otherwise, they don't understand who Yah is. Psalm 83 verse 15 says, So persecute them with your tempest and make them afraid with your storm. Who is Yah referring to? Verse 1 to 4 of the same Psalms 83 reads, Keep not your silence, O Elohim. Hold not your peace, and be not still, O El. For lo, your enemies make a tumult, and they that hate you have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people, and consulted against your hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Yahshar'el be no more in remembrance. Yahshar'el, did you get that? The psalm says Yah persecutes Yahshar'el's adversaries with his tempest and his storm. It gives the understanding that Yah uses the tempest and the storms against Yahshar'el's enemy. The Wisdom of Solomon chapter 5 verse 14 says, "For the hope of the wicked is like dust that is blown away with the wind, like a thin froth that is driven away with the storm, like as the smoke which is dispersed here and there with a tempest, and passes away as the remembrance of a guest that tarries but a day." Yahshar'el, Yah says he uses the wind and the storm to drive away the wicked. Who did it say, Yahshar'el? It says the wicked. Far be it that Yahuwah will destroy the righteous with the wicked. Joshua chapter 89 verse 16 reads, "You did pursue them in your storm. You did consume them in your whirlwind. You did turn their rain into hail. They fell in deep pits, so that they could not rise." Yahshar'el, who is Yah talking about? Verse 22 says, "Thus shall all your enemies perish, O Yahuwah, and the wicked shall be like a shaft driven by the wind, and your beloved shall be like trees planted by the waters." Here is the answer, Yahshar'el. Yah is talking about the wicked. But notice Yah says the beloved shall be like a tree planted by the waters. Yah will never destroy the righteous with the wicked. When Yah sent the flood, did he destroy the righteous with the wicked? Nope. Noah and his family were saved. When the earth opened up and swallowed Korah and the other men, who got swallowed up, Yahshar'el? Only the wicked. When Yah destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, did he destroy the righteous with the wicked? Nope. Lot and his family were taken out of the judgment. The same thing happened with Rahab. She was safe in the judgment. Yah's righteous people are always safe when he judges. Yahshar'el, please watch our teaching titled "The Night of the Passover, Yah is Innocent." In that teaching, we explain that the plagues that Yahuwah sent never affected the children of Yahshar'el, proving that when Yah judges, he makes a distinction between the righteous and the wicked. He never punishes the righteous, Yahshar'el, with the wicked. And that is how we know that the death angel was never sent by Yah, but it was the workings of Mastema. Yahshar'el, Abraham said in Genesis 18 chapter 25, "That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked. That be far from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?" This is who Yah is, Yahshar'el. He will not destroy the righteous with the wicked.
And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love you, Lord. I love you, Lord. For your mercy never failed me. All my day I've been held in your hand. From the moment I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
Yahshar'el, this is so sad. In the midst of the enemy doing his damage, we tend to say it is Yah, or Yah allows it. The children that are under the bed, how can you tell them that a loving Elohim allowed the enemy to almost destroy them? How can I love someone that is destroying me? That is what the enemy does, Yahshar'el. They tell us lies so we hate Yahuwah, or we don't truly love him because of things like these. Let's reveal the enemy for who he is, Yahshar'el. It is the devil and his seed that are doing these things, not Yah. Storms are spiritual. Yahshar'el, the awakening is not only to know who we are, it is also coming into Yah's truth. It is important also that we know that storms are spiritual, so that we can now pray the right way instead of praying amiss. Now, let's look at what they say a hurricane is.
Hurricane, cyclone, and typhoon are just different names for the same weather phenomenon.
Cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, one event but different names depending on the location. In the Atlantic and the Northeast Pacific, it is called hurricane. And in the Northwest Pacific, it is termed as typhoon, and in the South Pacific and Indian Ocean, it is called a cyclone. You can also classify them based on hemispheres, the northern ones as hurricanes and the southern ones as cyclones. There are also a few other differences in them apart from where they originate. Like the cyclones are usually clockwise, but the hurricanes are usually counterclockwise.
Yahshar'el, did you get that? They say hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons are the same weather phenomenon. The only difference is where they are formed. Now, let's listen to how they explain how hurricanes are formed.
In these regions near the equator, ocean temperatures reach at least 26 degrees Celsius. These high temperatures, along with winds blowing across the ocean, cause the water to evaporate. This creates warm, moist air that rises high into the atmosphere, where it forms big storm clouds. This cycle repeats as new, cooler air fills in the space above the hot water, then warms and rises as well. The rotation of the Earth causes the strengthening system to spin.
What?
The rotation of the Earth causes the strengthening system to spin.
Yahshar'el, they say the rotation of the earth causes the system to spin. If you believe that the earth spins, well, you are believing a lie. No. Remember when I showed you that they said hurricane spins counterclockwise and cyclone spins clockwise because of their location?
Like the cyclones are usually clockwise, but the hurricanes are usually counterclockwise.
Yahshar'el, if the earth spins in one direction, which it doesn't by the way, how come we get two different types of spins? Well, listen to this foolishness.
The Coriolis effect works in a way that it makes things traveling long distances around the Earth appear to move in a curve, rather than a straight line. It is a very powerful force that affects weather patterns, ocean currents, and even airplanes. The Coriolis effect comes into play because different parts of the Earth rotate at different speeds. Our planet rotates faster at the equator than it does at the poles. It's wider, or more technically, has a greater circumference at the equator. Therefore, in order to complete one rotation in 24 hours, the equatorial regions experience a much higher rotational velocity than other parts of the planet.
Yahshar'el, they say at the equator, the earth spins faster. G's and P's, I tell you, the more they explain, the dumber it gets. I know some of you might say all sorts of stuff and might boast in your so-called university papers. Well, you are not the only one with papers, and that is why I say we are taught lies. 2 Timothy 3 verse 7 reads, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. So many of us are always going to school, always learning, attaining a Bachelor of Science all the way to a PhD. Well, we are taught lies. Ever learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. What Yah says is truth, and what the world gives us is nothing but lies, because the devil is the god of this world. The world is given into the hands of the wicked, and the wicked are teaching us lies. Jubilees chapter 2 verse 2 says, for on the first day he created the heavens which are above, and the earth and the waters, and all the Ruach, all the spirits which serve before him, the angels of the presence, and the angels of sanctification, and the angels of the Ruach of fire, and the angels of the Ruach of the winds, and the angels of the Ruach of the clouds, and of darkness, and of snow, and of hail, and of hoar, frost, and the angels of the voices, and of the thunder, and of the lightning, and the angels of the Ruach of cold, and of heat, and of winter, and of spring, and of autumn, and of summer, and all of the Ruach of his creatures which are in the heavens and on the earth. Enoch chapter 60 verse 1-3 reads, Then another angel who proceeded with me spoke to me, and showed me the first and last secrets in heaven above, and in the depths of the earth, in the extremities of heaven, and in the foundations of it, and in the receptacle of the winds. He showed me how the Ruach were divided, how they were balanced, and how both the springs and the winds were numbered according to the force of their Ruach. Enoch chapter 75 verse 7-11 reads, And the days Uriel showed me, the angel whom Yahuwah of glory appointed over all the luminaries of heaven, in heaven, and in the world, that they might rule in the face of the sky, and appearing over the earth to become conductors of the days and nights, the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the ministers of heaven, which make their circuit with all the chariots of heaven. Thus Uriel showed me 12 gates open for the circuit of the chariots of the sun in heaven, from which the rays of the sun shoot forth. From these proceed heat over the earth, when they are opened in their stated seasons. They are for the winds and the Ruach of the dew, when in their seasons they are open in heaven at extremities. Yahshar'el, Yah made the seasons and the winds, etc. Yahuwah has angels that govern these things. So what they tell us are nothing but lies. They themselves know these things are spiritual. Remember, all those angels that went against Yah still have the knowledge that they had before they fell. The only difference is that they are using it for evil. Watch this, Yahshar'el. The word hurricane comes to us via the early Spanish explorers of the New World, who were told of an evil god of winds and destruction, variously called Huracan, Unraken, or Jaracan in the Caribbean and Mexico. Yahshar'el, all these names are names of demons. Hurricane is named after a Mayan god that has control over the winds and storms. Do you think that name is a coincidence? Typhoon is named after Typhon, which is the Greek god of winds. In Egyptology, he was Set. These are all demons, Yahshar'el, and they know it, but they tell us lies to have the advantage over us. 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 11 says we must not be ignorant of Satan's device, lest he takes advantage of us. Yahshar'el, they say the wind that blows the Sahara dust is called Sirocco. Did you know that Sirocco is the name of a demon? Yahshar'el, Sirocco is the name of a dangerous and monstrous elemental of wind, appearing as a demonic jackal. And you can find this in the cartoon that is called Aladdin. Even in cartoons, Yahshar'el, even in cartoons, they are telling us these things. If you read the Testament of Solomon, you would realize that there was a demon that blew mighty winds over the desert, and Solomon had to seal him. Why do you think they would name these things after demons? Answer, because they are demonic. The source of these things is spiritual. Storms are evil spirits, and hurricanes are storms that have been enhanced through evil inventions and knowledge given by the fallen angels. You see, Yahshar'el, we fail to understand what Yahusha has done for us. The world before and after the flood, we don't understand. Angels came down and mated with the daughters of men. Demons came into existence, etc. Even after the flood, we saw Satan appearing to Abraham and caused a flood, and Abraham rebuked him. Yahusha came, and through his sacrifice, he closed the doors on the enemy and have rendered the enemy powerless. Why do you think scripture says he closed doors that no one can open? These are the doors, Yahshar'el, to the spirit realm where the demonic has power. The enemy cannot do as he pleases now, as what was done before. However, due to the ignorance of our people and through the serpent seed, doors are being opened to the enemy through evil inventions. Watch this, Yahshar'el.
This morning, the Atlantic hurricane season enters day 2. Forecasters predict fewer storms this year, but they also warn a quiet season can produce a devastating hurricane. Mark Strassman is in Miami, where researchers are creating their own storms in a state-of-the-art lab. It could end up saving lives. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. This tank gives scientists and the rest of us a view no one has ever had before. What a hurricane's power looks like at water level as it storms ashore. In just 2 minutes, scientists here can take calm waters and turn them into a monster hurricane.
The wind is gradually getting stronger and stronger as it's coming up here, and it's ramping up to a Category 5. It's probably about a Category 3 right now.
This 75-foot-long tank is the first simulator in the world capable of creating a Category 5 hurricane over water. Brian House is the director of the University of Miami's new laboratory at the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science.
YAHSHA'El, if they can do this in a lab, they can definitely do this outside. YAHSHA'El, if you visit geoengineeringmonitor.org, and there are many sites like these, alright, so you can find the information just the same, you will see, YAHSHA'El, that they are not hiding what they are doing. They are geoengineering the weather and calling it climate change. What is geoengineering? Climate geoengineering refers to large-scale schemes for intervention in the Earth's oceans, soils, and atmosphere with the aim of reducing the effects of climate change, usually temporarily. Geoengineering techniques do nothing to address the root causes of climate change, and evidence suggests that it could make our climate worse. YAHSHA'El, I must show you some of the projects that they are doing. YAHSHA'El, you can use this on your own to see the many geoengineering projects that they are working on. Example, to the right where it says weather modification, there are 67 geoengineering projects going on. And they tell you what they are. Here it says 40 types of projects to increase precipitation, 21 to reduce precipitation, and precipitation has to do with rain, snow, sleet, or hail that falls. You can go to the search column and type in a country and search for projects within that country. After it lists the projects, you can click on anyone and get more information. The description tells you info about the project. It tells you if the project is ongoing, the duration of the project, and who are sponsoring the project. Here we see the University of the West Indies is involved in this geoengineering project. If we look at another, we can see that Bill Gates is sponsoring one of the geoengineering projects in Jamaica. YAHSHA'El, your government and these wicked people are lying to you. You better wake up. So, let me ask you this again, YAHSHA'El. Can they manipulate these weather conditions?
Many ask this question: can cyclones, can hurricanes be manipulated? The short answer is yes. Project Cirrus. The U.S. military has been engaged in hurricane manipulation programs since at least 1947. And these programs have been ongoing ever since, although the U.S. military denies it. They claim they stopped this research. That is a blatant lie. GeoEngineeringWatch.org has captured film footage of the radio frequency transmissions being used to manipulate the atmospheric particulates sprayed by climate engineering operations in order to steer and direct hurricanes. They can be manipulated to a degree that few can comprehend. We have NASA satellite images available at GeoEngineeringWatch.org that show extraordinary atmospheric manipulation off the west coast of Africa, where cyclones in the Atlantic basin originate. There's no theory, there's no hypothesis, there's no conjecture. Cyclone manipulation is absolutely, positively being done.
YAHSHA'El, have you ever heard of Operation Popeye? Operation Popeye was a military cloud seeding project carried out by the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam War in 1967 to 1972. Operation Popeye's goal was to increase rainfall in carefully selected areas. Did you get that? in carefully selected areas so they can select areas where the rain should fall. Are you seeing this, YAHSHA'EL? To deny the Vietnamese enemy, namely military supply trucks, the use of roads by softening road surfaces, causing landslides along roadways, washing out river crossings. YAHSHA'EL, they have been manipulating and controlling the weather from in the 60s and earlier. Don't you think they can do more now in 2024? Remember, hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones are the same weather phenomenon. YAHSHA'EL, did you know that the United States of America has a Weather Modification Policy Act of 1976? It says from 1976 and we are now in 2024. YAHSHA'EL, it's time to wake up. Now, I'm going to ask you this. Have you ever wondered why most of these storms and hurricanes come from the west coast of Africa? YAHSHA'EL, most hurricanes and storms in the Atlantic starts off the west coast of Africa. This is where the slave coast was. This is what they call Negroland. This is where our forefathers went after Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. They hide these things from us, YAHSHA'EL, because they don't want us to know who we are. We are the people of the book. No, the path to which these storms and hurricanes travel is the same path which the slave ships traveled. Think that is a coincidence? It is because of all the innocent blood of our forefathers that was shed. These people killed so many of our people en route to their strange lands that they would dump so many bodies in the ocean that they said sharks followed those ships because they knew they were going to get fed. The shedding of the blood of the true Hebrew causes the demons to operate because of the innocent blood. The shedding of innocent blood opens a door to these spirits. Why do you think they always sacrifice to their pagan gods? Blood is what connects the spirit realm with the physical realm. And that is why Yahushua's blood tore the veil and opened the way where we can now go directly to our Abba Father. Let's go to Lamentations chapter 4 verse 12 to 13. Lamentations 4 verse 12 reads, "The kings of the earth and all the inhabitants of the world would not have believed that the adversary and the enemy should have entered into the gates of Jerusalem. For the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests that have shed the blood of the just in the midst of her." YAHSHA'EL, the adversary and the enemy comes when the blood of the just is shed. 2 Samuel chapter 21 verse 1 says, "There was a famine for 3 years, and when David inquired of Yahuwah, Yahuwah told David it was because of the blood Saul shed." If you know the story, Saul slew the Gibeonites when he should have not, because of the covenant that was made with them. The famine stopped when David handed over the sons of Saul to the Gibeonites, and they were hanged. Verse 14 says the land was entreated after. Jubilee chapter 7 verse 33 reads, "For the earth will not be clean from the blood which has been shed upon it, for only through the blood of him that shed it will the earth be purified throughout all its generations." Scripture says the earth will only be cleansed when the blood of him that shed the blood is shed. Blood for blood, as we saw with Saul. Until Yahushua returns, these things will last because there is no forgiveness for what they did to Yah's people. Anyway, I'll expound on that in our future teaching. YAHSHA'EL, the 4th book of Ezra, chapter 8, verse 27 reads, "Regard not the wicked inventions of the heathen, but the desire of those that guard your testimonies in afflictions." How did they get these wicked inventions? Enoch tells us that the watchers taught men many things. Enoch chapter 9 verse 5 says, "Azazel taught men the secret things which are done in heaven." It is the same today, YAHSHA'EL. These people are given knowledge from the fallen. They know they are the ones eating up the earth. But what is the cause? For that, I'll save for a future teaching. There is so much to share, YAHSHA'EL, and so much scriptures to reveal. But I don't want this to be too long. I have attached a documentary to show you that they are geoengineering the weather. Hurricane Beryl was man-made. Watch this.
Welcome back, July 10th, 2024, and we have a lot to talk about. We have the Antarctic anomaly where an earthquake took place, nearly a 7.0. In fact, it was a 7.1, downgraded to a 6.7. That is a massive earthquake for this part of the world, and nobody's talking about it. Also, we now have a major heat dome that formed over the Atlantic Ocean after Hurricane Beryl. This is also very concerning and not normal, and I believe that the Antarctic anomaly is responsible for this. That's why we saw this major hurricane come off the West African coast and become the first major hurricane we've ever seen in the month of June, and then broke records for the month of July as well. So all the evidence we've been posting about for months now is completely coming together and showing that the Antarctic anomaly has been doing exactly what we said. It's a type of frequency technology that is causing crazy weather events all over different continents, and eventually the heating of the oceans and very strong hurricanes. And it's only just begun. This is the beginning of the season. The Colorado State University hurricane map is now showing even more hurricanes than it first put out at the beginning of the season. According to the new data, we are expecting 22 more named storms, 12 of them becoming hurricanes, and 6 of them becoming major hurricanes. This, my friends, is as crazy as things can get.
Yahshar'el, don't follow these liars about Yah is the one sending storms and hurricane. It's all lies.
I told our church that we were going to start over. And yet again, I believe God said, Keon, your faith was too small. So let me blow the building down so you can build what I put in your heart. God gave me a vision, and he said we can do it in 21 days. I'm asking 2,100 people to give $2,100 in the next 21 days.
Yahshar'el, they are purposely teaching us lies so we can wrongfully accuse Yah. And when we do this, we bear our own sin. And that empowers the enemy in our lives. That is what scripture says. I'm going to show you how important it is to let the scripture interpret itself, Yahshar'el, and stop allowing these liars to teach us. Remember the story about Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4, when he got the dream about the tree and he was driven to dwell with the beasts of the field and ate grass? They told us that it was Yah that did this to him because of his pride. Well, what if I told you that this is not what scripture says? Let's read. Thus were the visions of my head in my bed. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached unto heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, and the fowls of the heavens dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. And I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher, and a holy one came down from heaven. Yahshar'el, verse 13 says, a watcher and a holy one came down from heaven. Remember, the watchers are fallen angels. Please pay attention to what the watcher did. Verse 14. And he cried aloud. Who cried aloud? The watcher. He cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Who said this, Yahshar'el? The watcher. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers. Are you seeing this, Yahshar'el? This matter is by the decree of the watchers, not Yah, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that El Elyon, this is the incorrect translation right here, Yahshar'el, because Yah has nothing to do with the watchers, rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whosoever he will, and sets up over it the basis of men. Yahshar'el, are you seeing this? Please tell me you are seeing this. It was the watchers that did it, and not Yah. It says the matter of such was by the decree of the watchers, not by the decree of Yah, of the watchers. Verse 23 says, and whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew the tree down and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of El Elyon, which is come upon my Adonai the king. Yahshar'el, verse 24 says it was the Most High, but all the other scripture says it was the watchers. We know who the watchers are, and we know that Yah has no association with these types of angels. So how was it the decree of Yah? It wasn't Yah, Yahshar'el. It was the watchers. Even verse 25 says, they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts. They here cannot be Yah. They here are the watchers. It's right there. Are you seeing this? The wicked uses Lord and God to confuse us, as I have shown you in previous teachings, making it hard to differentiate when it is Yah or not. That is why, Yahshar'el, it is important to understand Yahuwah's nature and characteristics. Just like how we say it was Yah who cursed Nebuchadnezzar and he lost his mind and went among the beasts and ate grass, we say the same thing with storms and hurricanes, Yahshar'el. Yah is not the one doing this. Yah is innocent. These things are being done by devils and his serpent seed, not Yah. Yahshar'el, these storms and hurricanes are not from Yah. Yahshar'el, as usual, it is my pleasure to bring the word of Yah to you. Don't be fooled by the lies of this world. They are the ones geoengineering the weather and telling us it is climate change. Question everything, Yahshar'el, and always let Yahusha, which is the true light, be the guide and the light in your life. Yahshar'el, protect the temple of the Most High at all costs. Don't let your guard down. Pay attention to what the scriptures say and not to the hand that the enemy is showing. Remember, he is a liar from the beginning, and so are his seed and his agents. Until then, Yahshar'el, keep strong, be strong. Know that you are the righteousness of Yah in Yahushua HaMashiach. For so is HaMashiach, so are you in this world. May Yah bless and keep you. May Yah shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May Yah lift up his countenance upon you and give you his everlasting peace. Hallelujah. Yahshar'el, the end credit this time is a documentary. Please enjoy and don't sing about praising in the storm or resting in the eye of the storm. That's not biblical. The storm is demonic. We do what scripture says, Yahshar'el. That is, we rest in Yahusha, in his finished work, not no storm. Alright? Now that we know these storms and hurricanes are not from Yah, we can now pray the right way, Yahshar'el, knowing it is spiritual. Yahshar'el, bless you in the mighty name of Yahushua HaMashiach. And I pray, and let us pray, that Yahusha rebuke every storm in our lives. And that is why, Yahshar'el, it is important to let scripture interpret scripture. Hallelujah! Praise Yah!
Perhaps the greatest lie ever perpetrated on populations all over the world is the condensation trail lie. What we're seeing in our skies is not condensation. It's sprayed particulate dispersions with very few exceptions.
They shouldn't be there. Jet engines burn clean. So if there's anything coming out of them, it's an additive.
They're absolutely not contrails. Contrails do not linger, dissipate, and go into cloud coverage, period, in the report.
And I kept saying to people, what is this? Because now the sky is no longer blue, it's starting to turn gray. And what I found was kind of like it was not socially acceptable. We're all going to pretend this is not really happening. And I thought, oh, this is very bad.
Most are unfamiliar with a science term called global dimming. That term refers to the amount of direct sunlight that no longer reaches the surface of the planet due to light scattering particles that are building up in the atmosphere. And although many of these particles are from industrialized pollution, the larger majority are from the ongoing climate engineering solar radiation management operations. This engine, a high bypass turbofan jet engine, this is the engine that is on all military tankers and all commercial carriers, is in essence a jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through this engine is non-combusted. This engine by design is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under rare and extreme circumstances. And again, we have film footage of aircraft flying at altitude with nozzles visible, turning on and off. That is the end of the argument. Since even before man could fly, there was an effort to try to modify the weather. We have weather modification patents going back 100 years plus.
These are historical films of what can be done with a biplane, a small biplane that carries a very small payload. And that much can be done. How much more can a fully loaded military tanker, KC-10, KC-135, C-17 Globemaster, how much more material can they put in the air? About 500 times more with a single tanker.
In regard to the condensation trail narrative, many refer back to the trails left by World War II bombers as proof that we are only seeing condensation trails in our skies. But geoengineeringwatch.org found on military archives film footage, which we posted, of World War II B-17s at altitude turning off a sprayed dispersion. We know that climate engineering was deployed immediately after World War II, so testing was absolutely ongoing. Clearly, these bombers were used for beta testing. Film footage proves it.
Weather was a weapon used over Vietnam. Would you expect that to be then deleted from the availability? No. To continue to expand the scientific aspects of it, to have it available in your portfolio of weapons would be a natural process. Therefore, should you expect that it is available on demand to have the ability to modify weather? Absolutely, within this country and others.
Climate engineering is the crown jewel of the military-industrial complex. Climate engineering has been used to destabilize and topple nations all over the globe, facilitating military occupations by hostile countries like the US. We know that some of these countries are having their precipitation cut off because they have stated so on the floor of the UN, like the president of Iran stating emphatically that NATO weather modification programs were cutting off the precipitation to Iran, but US media never covered it.
We have an economic model operating globally, which is operating based on covert force. And I have very serious questions after watching the financial patterns as to whether that financial force or that force includes weather warfare.
People were coming to me, telling me about this. So because of that, I went to the government in Ottawa under Freedom of Information. There was a 40-page report, of which half the pages were completely blank, and the other half had a lot of blank outs. But there was sufficient information to tell me that, yeah, they're aware. They call it geoengineering.
One of the big problems is that when we find some new technology, we get all excited by it, by the potential benefits of that technology, and often implement it and use the technology before we have any idea of the negative effects.
Shouldn't it be considered that every breath we take is laden with highly toxic particles that are wreaking havoc in our own bodies? Particles that aren't being reported by any air quality testing systems. Any official air quality testing are looking for PM10 or PM2.5, 2.5 microns at best. The climate engineering nanoparticulates are exponentially smaller. They go virtually unreported.
These nanomaterials generate reactive oxygen species in biological materials, damage tissue, lead to advanced aging, cause cancer, causative agents of dementia. So, yeah, we might think that we're doing something positive for humanity to save our species, but we're also poisoning ourselves.
Eventually, with the team that we formed at geoengineeringwatch.org, we were able to acquire a NOAA flying lab. We were able to test at altitude to confirm the elements that were showing up at the surface.
Our intention was to do a point-to-point sampling mission. We could see these obvious patterns that were being laid out in the sky. We were really thankful for the opportunity to be able to get up to altitude. And on the return mission, we noticed that that cloud layer had descended. And we sampled below the cloud layer, we sampled through that confluent layer and above it.
We found exactly the same elements listed in climate engineering patents, the same elements we found on countless surface tests of precipitation from all over the globe. Governments all over the globe and the entire climate science community are telling the population urgently that climate engineering operations, solar radiation management operations need to be immediately deployed to try to mitigate the warming of our planet, to try to preserve what's left of its life support systems. And yet when the public, those that are awake, try to bring to the attention of academia and elected officials that we see climate engineering already being conducted in our skies all over the globe. It's already been deployed. Lab tests prove it. Film footage proves it. Documents prove it. And yet we have the continued denial from the climate science community and official agencies telling us that we're not really seeing what we're seeing in the skies. They tell us if climate engineering were deployed, it would look exactly like what we're seeing in our skies. But then again, they tell us that we're not really seeing what we are actually seeing. The paradox is the more the climate engineers spray the planet, destroy the ozone layer, disrupt the hydrological cycle, and increase the overall warming of the planet, the more they feel they have to ramp these programs up to try to mitigate some of the damage that these programs have done in the first place. That is the true definition of insanity.
As a society, we are like a freight train heading for a broken bridge that is just a few years away from us. And I think people don't understand the exponential increase of toxicity in the environment.
These operations should be considered the most insane endeavor ever deployed by the human race. These operations are systematically derailing all of Earth's life support systems in the attempt to blot out the sun. The myopic, short-term objective of trying to cool the planet while worsening the overall warming. The climate engineers, if these operations are allowed to continue, are pounding the nails into our collective coffins.
From a scientific perspective, and what we know about nanomaterials and their effect on human health and the environment, this is a serious problem. And it really does warrant further scientific investigation.
We need the answers to get to the bottom of this national security problem.
If populations around the globe find out what has been done to them by their governments without their knowledge or their consent, there will be a shockwave around the globe that cannot be contained by the criminal governments that have now taken control of our planet and civilizations all over the world.
Just bringing transparency will shift so many things that it will make it extremely difficult, because you cannot manage an entire planet with overt force, only with covert force. If we bring transparency to who it is in the covert force, it shifts everything.
Look at your own health and you know what is going on. And if you love your children, join us in fighting what we need to fight. This is a just fight, it's the right fight, it's the right cause.
And if the climate engineering operations, which are derailing Earth's life support systems, are not immediately exposed and halted, all other challenges for the human race become moot because the planet will no longer support life. We are in completely uncharted territory. Virtually the entire web of life is being systematically contaminated and decimated by the ongoing climate engineering operations, on top of all other forms of human activity or anthropogenic activity that are wreaking havoc in the web of life. Climate engineering, mathematically, statistically speaking, is the single greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face, short of nuclear cataclysm.
Sounds like pure science fiction, but there is a growing underground movement of people who believe that our harsh drought is part of a government conspiracy.
Here, outlandish ideas like weather warfare and climate engineering, in other words, weather control, are accepted as basic fact.
Climate engineering is the greatest single assault on the environment ever launched by humanity, without question.
Dane Wigginton, lead researcher for Geoengineering Watch, is sounding the alarm. Climate engineering, they say, is to blame for the harshest recorded drought in California history. Dane is used to skeptics. He once was one himself.
Talk is cheap for those that haven't investigated. I didn't want to believe this either.
His background is in solar power, but he started investigating on his own about a decade ago after becoming suspicious something was partially blocking the sun's energy from reaching his solar home.
I grew up in Southern California, choking in a sea of smog. None of the adults around me seemed concerned about the conditions, but for me, life in the toxic murk was intolerable. I have always fully recognized the immense damage being inflicted on the planet by countless forms of human activity. I lectured on anthropogenic global warming. I dreamt of clean air and blue skies. I dreamt of living in untainted wilderness, off the grid. I dreamt of planting trees and watching them grow and thrive. I dreamt of coexisting with the wild inhabitants of the forest. I finally made it to the serene setting I had craved for so long, a remote forested mountaintop in Northern California. But the dream soon turned to a nightmare. When I began to lose significant amounts of my solar power uptake from my off-grid wilderness home, I knew something was radically wrong. We are officially told that the aircraft-emitted trails in our skies that linger, spread, and sometimes cover the entire horizon are just condensation. But the condensation trail narrative is perhaps the greatest lie ever perpetrated on populations all over the world. It is not possible for condensation to block at times 60, 70, even 80% of my solar power uptake. I began to research the issue of geoengineering, aka climate engineering, programs that governments around the globe and in climate science communities have told us are only proposals. Yet, there they were in the skies above me. Even today, we are being told, falsely, by the climate science community that we have one final card to play to try to avert total climate collapse, total planetary meltdown, but this is in fact a lie. Climate engineering, weather modification patents go back more than 100 years, but all available data indicates that programs were first deployed at scale immediately after World War II and deployed over the polar regions in the attempt to increase the size of the polar ice packs and thus try to regulate Earth's temperatures.
It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Numerous government documents posted at geoengineeringwatch.org, some as much as 800 pages long, prove that global governments, even governments that the public perceives as being adversarial, are in fact colluding and cooperating on the climate engineering issue due to the cross-border ramifications. You can't climate engineer over your own country without affecting the entire planet. They are all working together on these issues, and other governments around the globe are either actively or passively cooperating.
Is the government experimenting with our weather? People say the government is up there in airplanes spraying all kinds of chemicals to change or manipulate the weather.
It is called geoengineering, fighting global warming by putting a chemical dust in the atmosphere and reflecting harmful radiation back into space.
You could use barium oxide, for example, which makes big fluffy clouds. You could use tiny little bits of aluminum, which is benign in the environment, and essentially manage the climate.
There are 172 bills before the U.S. Senate right now calling for more weather modification programs.
A Weather Modification Act calling for research in, quote, attempting to change or control by artificial methods the natural development of atmospheric cloud forms.
My personal opinion is that we have to keep geoengineering on the table. We have to look at it very carefully because we might get desperate enough to want to use it.
There is a line of research on what's called geoengineering, which are various techniques that would delay the heating to buy us 20 or 30 years to get our act together.
The stated goal of some of the world's most recognized geoengineers, like Dr. David Keith and Dr. Ken Caldera, is to put 10 to 20 million tons of nanoparticulates into global skies annually. That's an inconceivable amount of material. This material is on top of industrialized pollution.
Right? This is about how we engineer the planet. It's about the fact, an uncomfortable fact, but it is a fact, that we have the technical ability to do this. They are all fast acting, they are cheap, and they are fundamentally imperfect. And the problems of how you control something where an individual country can have tremendous leverage over the whole planet's climate, and where there are winners and losers in ways that really could be unpredictable. And I mean, not to frighten you, but I think you can imagine scenarios that lead to war.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection.
There's all sorts of ways you could do this, but the standard idea has always been spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up.
The example many people cite was when the Mount Pinatubo volcano exploded. And all of this ash went into the air and had a cooling effect on the Earth.
And so people have long proposed since the mid-60s that you could artificially add dust to the stratosphere and cool the planet. Not that this would be a good solution for global warming, it would not. But it does show the way we're steadily developing the powers to manipulate the planet with comparative ease. That sulfur in the lower atmosphere is masking some of the climate warming from CO2. So
is this the global dimming or something?
Yeah.
Their leading idea is basically to emulate what big volcanoes do, put material in the stratosphere to reflect sunlight.
So the problem is the following. If you add SO2 to the stratosphere, SO2 doesn't condense. So you might want to put alumina in. Alumina has a very high initial refraction. It's very small. It doesn't coagulate. And you can engineer particles that have particular properties. You can get them out of the stratosphere. You can concentrate particles near the poles. Costs are so cheap that the richest people on the planet could perhaps afford to buy an ice age. It's extraordinarily cheap. I knew it was cheap when I found that they were quoting me in tons. It's also true that particles, as they get bigger, fall out a lot faster. We sort of step back and think, okay, well, how would you actually make particles in the stratosphere? This is really engineering now. If it was aerosols in the stratosphere, it would likely be put there by airplanes. Start with a fleet of just 2 or 3 kind of modified business jets. The basic idea is that if you let a plume off in an aircraft by just changing some little details, you can actually get much smaller particle size distributions by doing this kind of spraying. So there are all sorts of side effects. I'll get to them in a second, but if you put sulfuric acid in the stratosphere, for example, you could deplete stratospheric ozone. Smaller size means more surface area, but more surface area means less ozone.
Is the stuff in the stratosphere going to be killing some number of people that are going to be sacrificed?
It's an obvious concern.
So if it kills 1 million people and we're only doing 1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
Okay.
But that's, so killing people is not the objective here. So if I made a decision, or if there was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense, would put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision.
And so the only thing that we can do to cool the planet, or that society can do to cool the planet, is deploy these sorts of technologies.
And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard. It's more like free riding on our grandkids. And it means there are going to be winners and losers, just like there are winners and losers for CO2, but they're different winners and losers. So this makes the problem, if anything, harder to solve. You've introduced another dimension of complexity into the managing the planet's climate problem.
What we're watching financially is a great deal of public policy being promoted on the theory that we have climate change. And yet in that discussion, we never talk about, well, what's all this spraying and how is that involved? Engineering the weather gives you the ability to overcome or prevent droughts. It gives you the ability to inflict them if you don't go along. And the brilliance of inflicting a drought is there's no popular support against you. So this kind of invisible warfare, if it can be done, is very effective, it would seem to me, both positive and negative. Well, imagine if you can predict the weather over long periods of time, how much money you can make. You know, you can trade it. How do you manage money in that world?
Many people message me confused and bewildered as to how it is possible that such colossal programs can occur in skies above our heads, programs of climate engineering and solar radiation management that are literally decimating Earth's life support systems. And these programs are not being acknowledged by any official source, not being acknowledged by the climate science community that has indeed betrayed the human race and the entire web of life by their denial of the ongoing climate engineering elephant in our skies. And the people that message me are perplexed at how such atrocities can be ongoing for so many decades. And we have still official denial, and we have populations that are all too willing to accept that denial. I began to test for some of the primary elements named in climate engineering solar radiation management patents, starting with aluminum, barium, and strontium. My test came back from the state certified lab. To my dismay, these elements indeed were present in significant amounts, and subsequent tests showed higher and higher and higher amounts, continuing to escalate until one test was as high as 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum. This is highly toxic rain. I knew my life would never be the same because I can't look the other way. It's completely intolerable for me to live under toxic skies. And what about the trees? What about the bats, the bears, the birds, the bees? They have no voice except for us. I began to try to bring this issue to light from that moment on. Initially, few would listen, few would look at the data. But as time went on, and as more and more people woke up along the way and realized the significance of attempting to play God with the weather and engineer Earth's life support systems, more individuals from different arenas joined the effort to try to sound the alarm.
I want to tell you that we're in very great danger from the pollution that's coming down over us. And we've been led astray by the military-industrial complex. And they're responsible for the cloud's creation and weather manipulation programs.
I sacrificed 4 years of my life defending the people of my country just to come home and find there are greater threats here domestically.
There's something going on. I don't know who it is or why they're doing it. All I can testify is it's not natural and it's not normal.
Now, the aluminum content of rain should be 0.
And there's a lot of argument that aluminum is very common to be found, but aluminum is only common in a bonded form. It's not common in a free form, and we're finding high rates of free aluminum.
Because you can spread so many small little particles through the environment, it dramatically increases the surface area that's in that environment because there's so many of them. When you look up at the sun and you see a white haze, that is aluminum floating in the air right now, and it's coming from the aircraft.
Solar radiation management, SRM, to block the sun. That's the stated purpose. The consequences don't seem to be considered with these programs, but that is the stated purpose on almost all UN and global governance documents for these programs.
And in the past 5 years, I have seen the number of patients with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative diseases tremendously increase, almost quadruple.
United States Code says you cannot experiment on the American public, and if you do, you got to report it to Congress within 30 days. Where's the proof it did that?
But it is also to get the media to start reporting on this.
So all of us have a consequence that we may not be aware of. And it is important for all of us to join together and to put a stop to these programs and to hold public discussions on them for as much as possible. And I want all of you to know that it's important that we realize that this is not normal and natural, that these are programs, experimental programs that are being conducted at this time, and we all have to stand up and say no.
This tank can be used for disseminating all types of agents.
anti-crop spray from aircraft using the Aero X-2A has proved very effective in field trials. For larger planes, the Air Force has perfected spray equipment. This B-17 has several spraying nozzles and carries the tank in the bomb bay.
I'm Charles Jones, Brigadier General, U.S. Air Force retired. In the years 1953 through 1962, I was stationed in Germany. Then we moved to England in 1959 while assigned to the 42nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron with dual missions of electronic countermeasures and weather reconnaissance. We also had the responsibility of reporting jet engine contrails throughout our area of responsibility in Europe, North Africa, the Mediterranean, and Eastern Atlantic. We were responsible for pinpointing the exact altitudes of all jet engine contrails noted within the flying area of responsibility in both the weather and ECM aircraft missions. We became experts on jet engine aircraft contrails and all of their characteristics. Much different from the white aircraft spray trails that consist of scientifically verifiable spraying of aluminum particles and other toxic heavy metals, polymers, and chemical components. These are the long white spray trails that linger and slowly expand into light cloud cover that soon cover entire areas with an overcast, very light cloud cover. We're never going to get to the bottom of climate change until everything is laid on the table about geoengineering and the disasters that it can and is causing.
My name is Richard Rolig. I served a career of 34 years in the United States Air Force. I was able to achieve the rank of Major General. I was in the acquisition business, developing new weapon systems, and did lead one major top secret program for 3 years. During the 10 years I worked at Raytheon, the exposure to various programs was limited to what they wanted you to work on. So even though I still had the top secret clearance and certain programs I got exposed to, that was not one of them. That was compartmentalized as it should be. And unless you had a direct impact or you were personally involved in it, you would not have received that particular clearance. It goes back to around October of 17. I'm residing near an Air Force base here in Tucson, Arizona, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Aircraft exiting, doing their flight training, etc. And having lived around Air Force my whole life, my father even being a pilot, it became obvious to me that the contrails that were coming out of some of the aircraft in the local area were not normal looking. They took on a different texture, they spread differently, and so as a result, I started talking to a couple ex-pilots that are part of the organizations, asked them to look at it. My wife is a pilot. I had brought her out of the house. We looked at the contrails, and it was obvious that they were not normal. So as a result, we started doing a little research.
Yeah, we called it the elephant in the sky. I mean, everybody on the planet is looking up and seeing this kind of spraying going on. I became involved in weather modification analysis due to my background as a weather observer in the United States Air Force. And as I was looking at the jet clouds in the sky, I realized that that's certainly not normal. And so I've been watching these abnormal clouds for a long time.
Well, I started to learn about geoengineering just in a very personal way. I decided to leave Washington in 1998. I bought a small property in a farming community in Tennessee, and I still had business in Washington, and so I would drive back and forth between Tennessee and Washington, but I was also driving around the country networking with a variety of people, trying to understand what was going on in the economy. And as I was driving around, I saw this spraying, and literally you had planes crisscrossing in very unusual patterns. They'd fly back and forth, and you'd get this tapestry of crisscross spraying that would just hang in the sky for a long time. As an investment person, you're adding it up in your mind, okay, we have 2 planes over this county, flying this many hours and spraying this much stuff. This is very expensive. Who's paying for this? And I was doing a lot of research at the time on a great deal of money that was going missing from the federal government on a covert basis. On one hand, you have all this money going missing, and on the other hand, you have this fantastically expensive spraying program going on.
The ongoing global climate engineering operations must be considered a new Manhattan Project on a scale that is almost inconceivable. Governments all over the globe are either actively or passively participating in the ongoing climate engineering insanity, all for their own reasons, all in the attempt to keep business as usual until the last possible moment.
Geoengineering is occurring, it's been occurring, it is not new, and your tax dollars are funding this.
Well, my name is Kristen Megan Edwards. I am a U.S. Air Force veteran. I served 9 years on active duty working in bioenvironmental engineering. Upon my separation, which was honorably, I went and worked for the VA in the Veterans Health Administration as an industrial hygienist and an environmental specialist. So as an industrial hygienist, my job was to protect people from such things as heavy carcinogenic metals and hazardous materials. And through that, all items that came on base was approved through what is called an Air Force Form 3952. And that is a hazardous materials acquisition. So in order for a chemical to be brought on base, it had to be tied to a specific task. If people were painting aircraft, we knew where that paint was going and what it was being used for. And this was all for liability. So when you start to find constituents coming on the base that you're trying to remove from the base and engineer out through different industrial processes, that was a red flag for me and really told me to do my own research. I've often wondered with the large amount of people in all branches of the military who work in an environmental facet, why they aren't coming forward. I don't think a lot of people are connecting the dots. Now, I wouldn't have stumbled upon why these constituents were being brought on base unless I had heard about geoengineering. So a lot of times I think people are supporting an operation but haven't really seen outside information to tie it to why this is going on. To see how much taxpayer dollars are used in military operations, whether they're peacetime or wartime, to see how much money is spent to reduce hazards, again, that affect human health and impact the environment, is a complete contradiction to geoengineering using wartime exemptions to not be cited through the EPA. This is a huge waste. This is fraud and waste from the US government. And that this is allowed to go on to me is unbelievable.
I think it's one of the most dangerous, diabolical things that has ever happened to us. It's the most dangerous thing short of a nuclear cataclysm. So I take it very, very seriously and will do everything I can to try and expose the problem and encourage people to do likewise.
Well, when I was growing up, I was really a fan of Kurt Vonnegut, and Kurt wrote some remarkable works. And I later learned that most of the fodder for that work came from the work of his brother, Bernard Vonnegut, who was a scientist at GE under Irving Langmuir, the lead scientist there. That work was focused on the production of ice crystals at elevated temperature using a compound called silver iodide.
I would like to take you into the laboratory and show you a few of the experiments that led us to our outdoor experiments in converting clouds into snow. These are some which I photographed that were formed in the laboratory. This is a picture of the first cloud that we seeded back last November. Putting dry ice from a small dispenser in the bottom of the plane, under many conditions of course, full-fledged snowstorms will be produced in this way. Nature at last has permitted to do a little something about the weather.
These were something that scientists had worked on and developed through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and was likely being deployed even today. The research done by Vonnegut and Langmuir coincided with changes in our sky. As these programs, or at least this type of research, increased, the skies started to change. My first real observation of those changes and real awareness of it came, I was looking up and saw patterned skies of these trails that were being laid out by planes, then developing into confluent layers that would drift perhaps hundreds of miles, changes the weather, changes the temperature around you. Also, the light intensity and the quality of light was changing. It was funny that there was not really a lot of published literature on this material. There had been some governmental reports that I had dug into. There was some evidence that this type of research was being conducted. And in fact, there was a presentation that was given where Dane Wigginton asked some questions about the materials that they were discussing and their possible role in weather modification programs.
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Research Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
The question is, what would be the effects of these materials on human health if they came down into the stratosphere? In particular, small particles and aluminum. In our climate model, we looked at how much additional acid rain, acid snow you would get from the sulfur coming out of the stratosphere if you did it at a rate of 5 megatons per year or 10 megatons per year of sulfate. And it turns out that amount is so much smaller than what humans put into the troposphere on an annual basis by burning fossil fuels as a byproduct. That even in pristine areas, the soil would have a buffering capacity and it wouldn't be harmful.
So the collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in the federal pencil paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And the answer is no, clear-cut no. So for the numbers of particles burning in the stratosphere are so tiny compared to the loadings on human health. There are other things that worry me a lot, like the rain on these particles in the upper troposphere, when they might affect high clouds. And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously. But if you're just thinking about the sheer number of particles and the human health impact of small particles, the answer is, well, we haven't published it. That was the first thing we looked at with some of the leading experts who do epidemiological research on human health impacts, and it's not even close to being an issue.
So 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere will have no human health impact.
So let me be more careful here. To separate out the toxicological, so the aluminum we've only begun to research and publish nothing. The question I was asking was purely about particle number density. So what we did is we said, we looked at some global estimates now. We have of aerosol global estimates that were built for epidemiological purposes of the global loading of aerosols in terms of health impacts. And we said if we added on top of that what we're doing from the stratospheric aerosols, could it have any impact? And the answer is that was totally irrelevant. But that was just on particle number. We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at.
So after I saw that footage, I contacted Dane, and I started asking him some questions myself because I was interested in what he knew already. I mean, he was very forthcoming with all types of information. I realized that he had published a lot of material online, and I started perusing that material and found that, he was digging at something where there was, again, a lack of available scientific evidence, and that's where I became quite interested in contributing in any way that I could. I then, working further with Dane, and with great thanks to our contributors, was able to take a number of flights where we could sample through these condensation trails or these confluent layers that had been laid out earlier in the day. So on the first sampling mission, we started at the Baltimore-Washington International Airport. The University of Maryland has a twin-engine Cessna that is a flying laboratory. It has a sampling nozzle at the front of the plane that collects air samples prior to any contact with the plane or the engines or anything behind. Those samples are then taken through a tube, pass through a filter cassette, and these filters are glass fiber filters that are pretty large pore space filters that do effectively capture ground pollution. So PM 2.5, those particle sizes are 2.5 microns, and they've done a really good job of it. But it's not really the proper equipment to completely evaluate the number of particles that might be smaller than that. and we're talking 10 to 100 times smaller than the PM 2.5 particles. But those do capture some of them. And we flew in an air-controlled zone and basically flew big circles trying to get to altitude, but the control towers wouldn't actually allow us to reach the altitude that we needed. They basically want you to pass through that zone. The second flight that we conducted was flown from BWI to Albany International Airport. All right, we're just in pre-flight here. This morning we observed emissions from several planes, several high-altitude planes, flying between 25 and some up to 40,000 feet. And the trails that were left behind these planes spread out into a confluent layer. And the low angle of the sun in the morning allowed for us to observe the polarizing effects of those particles using simple polarizing lenses. We could see these obvious patterns that were being laid out in the sky. We were really thankful for the opportunity to be able to get up to altitude, that we could observe these materials and sample that cloud layer. Our intention was to do a point-to-point sampling mission where we could actually reach altitudes, approaching 20,000 feet. Unfortunately, on our flight from BWI to Albany, the layer that we observed was at 27,000 feet, and I think we made it to about 23,000 feet perhaps, and so we were below that confluent layer that we observed. We landed, had lunch, they refueled the plane. We have two blank control samples. One was taken prior to the flight, one was taken after the flight. So we should have, again, two blank samples and actually three samples, one on ascent, one at level flight, and then slight ascent from 17,000 to 21,000, and then changed the filter and took another sample, a third sample, as we descended. And then on the return mission, though, we noticed that that cloud layer had descended from 25 or 27,000 feet to about 17,000 feet. So we could easily reach through that, and we sampled below the cloud layer, and I'm saying cloud, I mean an induced cloud layer. We sampled through that confluent layer and above it.
The basic building blocks of climate engineering are to saturate the atmosphere with electrically conductive light scattering particles and polymers, particles like aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese. These particles are then manipulated with extraordinarily powerful radio frequency microwave transmissions that can heat the upper layers of the atmosphere like the ionosphere, that are used to create pressure zones that steer upper level wind currents, which then steer weather systems. These particulates, when they are manipulated with these frequencies, can literally move air masses. This is an integral part of climate engineering that is not known or being acknowledged by many. Extraordinarily powerful and dangerous radio frequency microwave transmissions.
Electromagnetic fields are energy sources, and they're going to be interacting with moisture in the air or our bodies or whatever. And therefore, it's not at all surprising that you're going to find some movement in relation to exposure of weather patterns to electromagnetic fields.
When you have things like HAARP that can send electromagnetic waves into the air column, if you send, lower frequencies, you can calm it all down and you can cool it. Or you can excite it and you can heat it up. So there's complete control of temperature within the environment.
In 1985, Bernard Eastland applied for patents. Many claim that these patents have become the blueprint for HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program.
HAARP is a large antenna where we beam radio frequency energy up into the upper atmosphere.
Applications discussed in the patents included destroying missiles. Communications control and disruption were included. There were some other ideas both to possibly modify weather.
What we can do with an antenna is change the portion of the sky into which we insert the energy.
HARP's combined antennae generate a focused billion-watt high-frequency radio beam, which penetrates the lower ionosphere and interacts with the currents of the auroral electrojet.
In certain applications, the military acknowledges that it can literally lift the ionosphere, and what they say is it's not a problem, it's a short period of time, yet when you lift the ionosphere up, the lower atmosphere rushes in and fills that void, which changes localized weather patterns.
At its biggest size suggested, if you beamed it for an hour and a half, that would equal the energy in a hydrogen bomb.
HARP is only one installation of perhaps 100 that are on that scale around the globe. You can create high-pressure domes. In the northern hemisphere, that creates a clockwise spin, just like the pulley. That allows them to steer the upper level winds into nearly any configuration they wish. So the areas that are under that high pressure dome fry. They fry. Take a look at that round bubble. Is that not telling? That's a high pressure dome parked right over the top of us that ensures nothing can flow in. You would never see this meteorologically 20 years ago. Never.
When you have two things that have the same mechanism of action, one would expect that their effects would be either additive or more than additive, that being synergistic. So we're talking about weather patterns. So you have fog, you have water droplets, you have water in the air. When those water droplets are irradiated with microwaves, they're going to do the same thing they do in our body. They're going to generate reactive oxygen species. And when nanoparticles are in that water, they're going to do the same thing they do in our body. They're going to generate reactive oxygen species. So at minimum, one would expect that these effects would be additive, with the possibility that it could be more than additive.
And if frequencies do that to particulates, again, what's it doing to us? What's it doing to the web of life? Given anything that's alive has water in it in some form or another, what's happening to us with this? And watch what happens to a flow of water when it's exposed to frequency. Very hard to believe, and when you feel that with particulates, the effect is even more profound. There's a radio frequency transmitter that, based on the signal transmission direction, is isolating precipitation and blocking out a whole section of precipitation. These are one of the radio frequency transmitters, and they're being put up all over the country, all over the world, wherever the grid power will support them. Again, you saw the radio frequency transmission carving out a 90-degree inside corner. That's the overall effect in the end. Completely unnatural. There's not a meteorologist that doesn't know this is going on. No chance. Many ask this question: can cyclones, can hurricanes be manipulated? The short answer is yes. Project Cirrus. The U.S. military has been engaged in hurricane manipulation programs since at least 1947. And these programs have been ongoing ever since, although the U.S. military denies it. They claim they stopped this research. That is a blatant lie. Geoengineeringwatch.org has captured film footage of the radio frequency transmissions being used to manipulate the atmospheric particulates sprayed by climate engineering operations in order to steer and direct hurricanes. They can be manipulated to a degree that few can comprehend. We have NASA satellite images available at geoengineeringwatch.org that show extraordinary atmospheric manipulation off the west coast of Africa, where cyclones in the Atlantic basin originate. There's no theory, there's no hypothesis, there's no conjecture. Cyclone manipulation is absolutely, positively being done.
Some of this technology actually came out of the stealth program. Stealth was the idea that you would try to reduce the amount of radar energy that would be reflected off of an aircraft. You could put particles of metal into the paint itself. These particles would then absorb the energy. But if you put that up into the air and then you broadcast a signal that is tuned to the exact frequency that matches the size, and this is the key, all of these particles are the same exact size, so they respond to a specific frequency. So when you transmit this frequency, you can get all those particles to heat up. And if that mass of air has moisture in it, any kind of humidity at all, it all rises and expands. So this is how you can actually generate a weather system.
A primary aspect of climate engineering is the climate engineer's ability to manufacture winter weather with patented processes of chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. In doing so, they can seed cloud moisture with what is termed endothermic reacting elements, energy absorbing elements that create a cold, dense layer of air that sinks to the surface of the planet and creates a shallow layer of cold, perhaps a few hundred feet thick, that creates the illusion of winter weather on a planet that's in total meltdown. So the surface temperatures are in fact very cold, sometimes astoundingly cold, but it's a shallow surface layer, manufacturing winter weather events that are then sensationalized by corporate media, dividing the population, again, confusing them as to the true state of the planet and the true temperatures on planet Earth. They have focused oftentimes on particular regions, like in 2014 in Boston on the east coast of the US, creating snowstorm after snowstorm after snowstorm with chemically nucleated moisture and creating sensationalized headlines from that event.
100 million Americans have been hit by a winter storm, packing pretty much everything in the weather arsenal.
And convincing much of the population that there was nothing wrong with the climate, that there was in fact record cold in some places, and thus in places where there was record warmth even during winter months, people tend to ignore that. As the planetary warming becomes a runaway event, the chemical ice nucleation elements that have been seeded into cloud moisture reach the surface before freezing. Thus, so-called frozen rain and ice storms are increasingly becoming the norm. How many know of the ice balls showing up on the shores of Lake Michigan, covering beaches, often 75 pounds or more, occurring at times on water that is 40 degrees plus Fahrenheit? How does that happen? From chemical ice nucleation. This is nothing short of winter weather warfare, complete with destructive ice accumulations from the chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding and dangerously slick, snow-like frozen material that contains surfactants. They're used in climate engineering chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations in order to reduce particle coagulation, i.e. to keep the climate engineering elements from sticking together and forming larger particulates that would sink faster to the planet, which would not be conducive to the winter weather warfare scenario. The cryosphere, Earth's ice deposits, are melting at a pace that is unprecedented in the geologic past. The true magnitude of the planetary meltdown has been masked by statistical falsification. The climate engineers have attempted to hide this fact from populations. In order to mask the true severity of polar meltdown from populations, the climate engineers have utilized methods of sea surface ice nucleation. The effect of these operations can easily be distinguished on satellite images. The paradox with sea surface ice nucleation is this. The climate engineers are actually putting a lid or a cap on oceans that are already too warm for natural ice nucleation to occur. In doing so, the climate engineers are, in effect, sealing the heat in the oceans, thus increasing the overall heating of the planet. It's another larger specimen of black oak. It's mid-February. It's already leafing out. It's 2 months ahead of when it should be leafing out. The leaves last fall stayed on the trees, and in late November, December, when a certain series of rains comes, we've seen this the last 4 years, all the leaves on the deciduous trees wad up dead, but still hang on the tree. As you see lower down on this tree, that's what we have. It appears to us as if some sort of defoliant is included in the aerosol spray mix. And we know fruit farmers have been using this type of method to cause their orchards to go dormant for years. This is because the temperatures have been rising so progressively.
Defoliants remove the foliage or leaves from the plant. A week after defoliation spraying, the plants stand dry and almost leafless.
Defoliation, a maneuver designed to peel back the cover from which the Viet Cong spring ambushes on Allied supply convoys and troop movements.
Decomposition of forest floor duff, the materials on the forest floor, leaves, pine needles, twigs, and sticks, is now almost non-existent. The soil microbiome has been devastated. The root systems of trees and forest flora are dying off, just as the crowns of the trees are also dying off. Climate engineering contamination is not only killing soil microorganisms, it is also causing trees to shut down nutrient uptake, which in turn initiates a slow, protracted death of the forest. Because of Earth's collapsing ozone layer, intense UV radiation is causing the stomata, the respiratory ports of trees, to shut down. Thus, trees don't respirate. They can't feed. They're simply dormant. The forest no longer smells like a forest because the trees are not breathing. Even during the spring and summer months, an increasing number of trees are growthless. What we are left with is stagnant, silent, dry, dead, and dying forests that are just a spark away from total incineration.
Every single person that I've talked to so far has made the mention that I don't know why it's doing what it's doing. It's burning differently. It's burning more aggressive than it has in years past. And I know we say that every year, but it's unprecedented. It's burning in every direction all at the same time.
The single greatest factor that is creating the conditions for the unprecedented wildfires all over the globe is climate engineering. Why? Because climate engineering is disrupting the hydrological cycle, i.e. the rain cycle. Climate engineering is destroying the ozone layer, which is bombarding forests with incredibly intense UV radiation, killing them from the top down. Climate engineering is ionizing the atmosphere, making it more electrically conductive, and this in turn facilitates more dry lightning, igniting yet more fires. Climate engineering is blanketing forest foliage and forest floors with a highly incendiary dust, aluminum nanoparticulates, barium, polymers. This further adds to the flammability of the forest. From every conceivable direction, climate engineering is the single greatest causal factor in regard to the epic forest fires that are consuming forests all over the globe. The equilibrium of our planet has been completely obliterated. And there are now feedback loops that have been triggered, as many as 50. It means once you knock a domino over, that domino knocks over a larger domino and still a larger domino. And the process continues, and that is now occurring on planet Earth. And now we have methane releasing from formerly frozen methane hydrate deposits all over the globe, in Siberian tundra, on the Arctic seafloor. Methane is escaping, rising into the atmosphere and covering the planet like a layer of glass. Methane over a 10-year time horizon is from 100 to 120 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. There's enough methane in these deposits to turn our planet into Venus many times over, and it is releasing now. And climate engineering, in the attempt to mask what is unfolding, has actually further fueled the process. Climate engineering alters upper-level wind currents. That in turn alters ocean currents. Now we have warm water pumping into the Arctic in places it should not be, causing massive methane blowouts that have to be seen to be believed. They can be seen when they occur on terrestrial areas like the Siberian tundra. Massive craters that look like something from a massive nuclear war.
The question is, that people should be asking, is if this is going on, why is nobody talking about it?
Under the security classifications that a program can have directed upon it, it can keep it in a narrow vein and keep transparency away totally. Absolutely. And the same can be with the contractors and subcontractors that work on the same program. That is to be expected. Any contractor that deals with a classified program will be as compartmentalized as the government program office is. That's the whole purpose. The ground rules are the same. In fact, you can't even bring that home and talk about it with your family or your friends or other work parties that are not also cleared on that specific program, whatever program that is.
You only are told what you need to know. And so they assume that most people don't need to know anything, and the rest to only know a little bit, except the people who are pulling the strings.
Many ask why environmental groups are not addressing the climate engineering issue. They appear to be more concerned about protecting their 501c3 nonprofit than they are about protecting the environment. Ignoring and obfuscating the truth about verifiable sources of damage to the environment is not protection. This is total betrayal. It's the same fraudulent behavior we see from every large corporation on the planet, towing the line for the power structure while decimating the entire biosphere in the process. Turning two blind eyes to this situation will not save us from the reality of the near-term impact we are facing. Here's the bottom line. There can be no legitimate discussion about the climate or the state of the climate without first and foremost including the climate engineering issue.
We do not have political representation for anybody being interested in saving this planet, and that is something I cannot understand.
There is an ever-increasing unhealthy cooperation between really all of the major media and the forces behind the scenes that are responsible for the environmental destruction.
So many people try to deny that these programs could be occurring because they claim if they were occurring, there would be people lining up to blow the whistle. And that is so utterly and totally false when we know that with modern day surveillance, every word that anybody of significance says is recorded somewhere by someone. And when we know what happens to whistleblowers like Julian Assange, why would anyone line up to put their own neck on the block to blow the whistle on these types of programs, knowing that it will at minimum destroy their life?
Even though half the pages were blanked out completely and others partially, the fact that they provided me this information and acknowledged, yes, they were aware, it's geoengineering, they were aware, they knew it was happening, and they were monitoring and part of it in that respect. So it's happening, no doubt about it.
If these programs were in any sense benevolent, why would there be an illegal federal gag order right now on all National Weather Service and all NOAA employees, the nation's weathermen, an illegal federal gag order?
Well, that should tell you right away that all of this is happening at a really high level, obviously. So they won't take questions on it. They feed us BS information on what's going on. The people that are telling us what we ought to be doing are leading us astray. And there needs to be a comeuppance and a really good investigation of what's going on.
If you look at the total wealth that we can create on planet Earth, if we create a financial system which supports life and is in alignment with life, what I will tell you is our current financial wealth is less than 1% of what's possible. We don't have economic problems on planet Earth. We have a political problem. But the economy is so suboptimized, and that's because there is this force controlling it from top down. So whatever's going on, I say tell the people, because the people can deal with it, and the people can, whatever problem there is, they can deal with it or they can solve it. So I'm big on transparency, and I know if enough people push for enough transparency, we can figure it out.
Could a strange substance found by a Southwest Arkansas man be part of a government test? KSLA News 12 investigation reporter Jeff Farrell shows us the results of testing we had done about what's in our skies.
They begin as normal contrails from a jet engine, but do not fade away like a normal contrail. KSLA News 12 had the sample tested at a lab. The results? A high level of barium, 6.8 parts per million, more than 3 times the toxic level set by the EPA.
We're just about ready to go into the clean room facility. We will be looking at the samples by scanning electron microscopy. Scanning electron microscopy will provide information about the particle size distribution. We will be able to get some elemental analysis. What really this technique is for is to prioritize our samples for downstream, more advanced imaging, more high-resolution imaging, especially by transmission electron microscopy. Put on a fresh pair of gloves. We're going to start with sample number 8. This is a blank that was collected on the return flight. No flow through this filter, so this filter should be free of any particulates. I'm going to use these scissors and forceps that have been cleansed with isopropanol and then acetone, and wipe free with these dust-free cloths. These are the series of samples that we're interested in. These are samples number 9, 10, and 11. These were taken on the return flight where the plane passed through an induced cloud layer. Number 10, I believe, is the one that was passed through a cloud layer at around somewhere between 17 and 19,000 feet. I will take time to cleanse the instruments between each sampling. Preparing sample number 9, near the center. Opening it to ensure that the surface that had received the particulates is facing upward. Number 9 is completed. Now processing sample number 10. One additional sample. This blank sample was taken after the plane landed, and 3 of the samples containing actual airflow particulates had been collected. So we have one prior to the mission and one at the conclusion of the mission. Prior to imaging, these samples are coated with a thin layer of platinum. The platinum helps to take the excess charge or electrons and drain them off to the stub. And now we'll do the samples where we pass through the cloud layer.
A few little bright particles. This particle here is probably the one that we'll do the most analysis on.
So the general image that we're seeing now are the glass fibers from the glass fiber filter itself, and the bright particles or bright areas that we see are areas operating in the so-called backscatter mode of this microscope, collects electrons that are backscattered, especially from metal center compounds. But you can clearly see the lighter and darker contrasted areas there, suggesting that it's an aggregate. Mm-hmm.
Some of the smaller particles in here we're looking at on the order of about 450 nanometers long. But there's also smaller particles in there too. So backscattered electrons, typically the higher the atomic number, the brighter the signal. That being said, what we will do is look for the bright spots and then analyze those. The glass itself does seem to have sodium in it. Looks like aluminum, sodium, silicon, calcium, potassium. Mm-hmm. So the reason that caught my eye is because it's darker than everything else. And it's got lots of small particles in it.
Yep. And this gives us a lot of information. Again, it identifies which filters have qualitatively more materials, just, basically we see more material on it. It also gives us information about size of particles and potential for aggregates that we might be dealing with in the samples.
Barium sulfide again?
So barium sulfide is interesting. What he's doing now is just getting a higher resolution image of it to see if this is indeed a single particle or if there's any evidence that there's an aggregate of smaller particles.
So really the big standout in this one seems to be iron. In this field we have one there, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And I did analysis on all of them. They all seem to be pretty similar in composition.
Yeah.
Well, this is definitely made up of much smaller particles.
Yeah.
So this may be a clump of what you're looking for. We just analyzed 3 different areas. This particle seems to be high in aluminum. It's a large flake, though. And this has some silver, too.
Yeah, in terms of now the aluminum signatures that we're getting from the glass fibers themselves,
this is much bigger.
Much bigger.
So look at that.
Yeah, that's the aluminum piece.
It's easily 3x the silicon.
Yep.
And I think the silicon and aluminum are pretty similar in the glass. So
Thoroughly
here, if you look at just the
dull.
glass fiber, silicon is significantly taller than aluminum. So that particle there is mostly aluminum.
Yeah.
So measuring this one right here, this is below 70 nanometers.
Right. Good. In the precipitation samples that we've seen in the past, the aluminum oxide particles that we've been seeing are on the order of 40 to 60 nanometers. So that's consistent with the size that we've seen from precipitation events. Again, these samples were collected directly from the air.
There's not a lot of approaches or instrumentation that you can use to observe these nanomaterials. I mean, again, these are the sizes of viruses. And so really the only equipment or instrumentation that is appropriate for identifying these materials is high-resolution transmission electron microscopy. This allows us not only to determine the size of the particles, we can also determine the composition using a technique called elemental dispersive spectroscopy. It's done within this large microscope. So it will give us information about the morphology of the particles, the composition of the particles, and we can actually see the crystalline spacing, so the spaces of the crystals themselves. So we are talking high resolution microscopic techniques that are really the only way to be able to observe these directly. Morphology is important because the productions of these materials are really of a constrained size range, and we've seen this already in samples that we've analyzed from other sources. American Element produces lots of these nanomaterials, and you can actually purchase them online. The size distribution of these engineered particles are quite homogeneous.
What we get? Ooh, looks like there's aluminum. Aluminum. Now what I've done is tell it to calibrate to the aluminum peak. So now what it's doing is going through each of its process times and each of its gain values and calibrating. Oh man. I can tell you this much. What I'm seeing right now is far superior to the last time I ran that calibration. So you see you got two calciums, right? Yeah. All right. K alpha, K beta. All right. This barium peak is probably an L or an M. Here's your major barium.
Yeah, and then you have the other to confirm there.
Correct. Barium is a triple quadruple.
It's definitely
yeah. Oh yeah.
The significance of the results is that, to my knowledge, this is the first evidence of nanomaterials collected directly from the emissions of aircrafts. This is the first time that this has been reported or acknowledged.
There is aluminum and there is aluminum. So the way the people are involved in the destruction of our beautiful planet, they get away with it is because the crust of the Earth consists of aluminum silicate.
Although traces of aluminum may be found in almost any soil, only those clays containing 50 or 60% aluminum ore and known as bauxite are mined for commercial production.
And so their argument is always, well, we always had aluminum in the system and our body knows how to deal with it. Well, there is a difference between creating nanoparticles of aluminum which do not exist in nature, which is a highly aggressive material that is seeking to chemically react with other things.
The chemical process reaches its climax in these huge tanks, where alumina is precipitated out of the ore in caustic solution. Later, the water content is driven off by baking in giant rotary kilns, resulting in this pure snow-white powder known as alumina. An ever-increasing amount of this alumina is being used in chemical processing, in soil conditioners, in abrasives, and many other applications.
aluminum particles are highly reflective and thus serve the stated agendas of the climate engineers, reducing direct sunlight. The nanoparticles of aluminum are also powerful desiccants, absorbing atmospheric moisture, reducing atmospheric relative humidity, derailing and disrupting the entire global hydrological cycle.
Nanoparticulates of different materials are produced for lots of different reasons. In fact, they're in cosmetics, titanium oxide nanoparticles used for sunscreen, zinc oxide.
So they're not a new invention. What has happened recently, and again, my knowledge is primarily the medical and health effects studies, is that we've learned to manipulate and create nanoparticles for specific design purposes.
We have exploding amount of national laboratory facilities which are researching just the nanomaterials. And it's scary because every single one of them, first of all, is toxic to human body. And second, it absorbs the gigahertz range radiation. Every single nanoparticle absorbs gigahertz radiation. Nanoparticle has nothing to do with the original material where it stems from. So aluminum in nanoform, you can literally explode it. It can be ignited at much, much lower temperature.
In this form, another unusual property of aluminum appears. Suspended in a paint vehicle, the powdered particles float to the surface and form a continuous layer of aluminum over the area being covered. This aluminum shield provides protection from weather and reflects light and heat almost as effectively as a solid sheet of aluminum.
Aluminum is one of the two metals, iron and aluminum, that exist in a 3+ state. Each plus means lacking an electron. And so aluminum salts are the most electron deficient metal, and with that highly, highly reactive to the proteins inside our cells, which are loaded with electrons. And so aluminum makes very, very strong bonds with the proteins in our cell, which means a protein that has incorporated aluminum becomes a dysfunctional protein that no longer works. We have about 200,000 working proteins in the body. That's what creates your testosterone. That's what creates your insulin. Yeah, this all made by intracellular proteins. And those get contaminated with the aluminum and become highly dysfunctional.
No creature has ever been found to utilize aluminum. There is no creature, no virus, no bacteria, no fungus, nothing that thrives on aluminum. It's deadly to all life on Earth.
In national defense, as in many other fields, aluminum is everywhere. In the air, on the ground, and on the sea, versatile aluminum serves our fighting men.
And this is the thing about the constituents used in geoengineering, is they are similar to items that are going in ground operations. So whether you're standing aircraft parts that contain strontium chromate, changing brake pads, working around barium, bending aluminum metals for different aircraft parts, this could all be explained as to their exposures. But the question is, those that don't work in those areas that are showing these symptoms, where's it coming from?
I think in the next couple of hours, we'll see that actually open up a bit before the clouds start to return a bit. That's the high cloudiness we're being sprayed up from the north. There's more upstream, though, for us later on this afternoon into this evening.
That we've been dealing a lot with some military activity in terms of chaff anyway, and that's something that I experienced for the first time yesterday. That was a whole lot of fun, and that's where the military just basically dumps some of the tiny particles of plastic or metal, mylar, into the atmosphere.
And when you see this kind of a pattern like this, you can rest assured there's something going on. They're actually little bitty magnetic and little bitty strips of, whether it's aluminum,
Then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow, believe it or not. Military aircraft flying through the region is dropping chaff. Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is.
So we conducted the analyses of these nanomaterials and conclusively confirmed that there were aluminum oxide, barium sulfate nanoparticles in the samples that we took on the East Coast on that second flight. For my mind, that would be sufficient, but I'm also was quite interested in, well, what's going on the West Coast? Are these similar types of results can be collected in various regions? I was really thankful to be part of a third sampling mission. We flew from near San Diego up to the Bay Area and back on one of these days where, again, there was clear evidence of patterned skies being induced by the emissions of aircrafts. In this sampling mission, there was a couple of different things. One is that we used a Learjet. It's a pressurized cabin, for one thing. We can get to higher altitudes. It's much quicker. And we used instrumentation that was appropriate for smaller particulates. We had instruments to monitor the air quality in real time. We had 2 particle meters on board, one that measured PM 2.5, so that would be relatively large particles that we're normally concerned about, these respirable particles that get into our lungs. But we also had on board a particle meter that went down to 20 nanometers. So that meter, combined with the larger particle meter, gave us a full assessment of materials ranging from 20 nanometers up to 2.5 microns. Our filters that we use were 0.1 micron, so that's 100 nanometer pore size. That would capture many more of the nanomaterials that were being released. What we're breathing in pressurized cabins is actually air from the outside. It's being taken in front of the engines. Some of the airstream goes into the engine to feed the combustion process, and then bleed air then off of that is taken directly from the outside, pressurized, and then is used to pressurize the cabin. And we could sample it right from the vents. So we had a sampling wand that we could hold up to the vent, and the sampling wand was sampling for the ultrafine particles. We sampled through one of these confluent layers. And as we passed through that layer, the larger particle meter basically read just ambient air within the cabin. With regard to the nanoparticle meter, there was clear evidence that there were smaller particles at significant numbers present within that layer. And that is significant. I mean, this is not only just the number of particles that we observed, but also that they were confined to that smaller size range. Above the layer, again, the air quality was quite good. Below the layer, air quality was quite good with regard to the smaller nanoparticle meters. But within that layer, there was clear evidence that there were smaller particles at significant numbers present within that layer. It has significance because this emerging condition known as aerotoxic syndrome, where airline attendants, pilots, people are becoming allergic to their own aircrafts. There really hasn't been identified any known cause of this phenomenon, but nanoparticles of that type can cause things like allergic reactions, these same symptoms that are being experienced by all of these people in the airline industry now. The data that we collected using the particle meter is already convincing in terms of there are nanoparticles that are present within that induced layer. What is needed now is a larger contribution from a broader community of scientists, health workers. However, that takes time. And in my opinion, we don't have that kind of time. These materials will reside in our children for their entire life, however long or short that might be. So we don't really have time to say, oh, more research is needed, although it is needed, but not at the same time as we continue to disperse these materials and affect our human population.
In the East and in the West, large forest land areas have been sprayed to kill destructive insects. This work by airplanes is significant. It has an indirect effect on all Americans.
Here's one to keep track of over here. Notice it didn't have anything coming out of it.
Yeah, he just turned on.
Just turned on his spray.
With commercial airlines, you're not going to get this kind of converging intersection, even though they're at different altitudes. But the important thing to consider, there's not a natural cloud in the sky. Everything in the sky is an aerosol out of the back of an aircraft. Anybody who says that can't affect the weather is simply ignoring logic and reality.
My rock climber's mentality says you have to face reality. You just have to face reality, or if you don't, you could end up at the bottom of a cliff because gravity will take you there. When I see El Capitan over there looming in the distance, and I think about the times, I feel what this place has given me is so much as a human being to experience life. You can't not care. You have to care about it.
You can't not care.
You can't not care. That is not human. That's a human who's been conditioned to no longer be a human being. With all the spray that's been put up in our atmosphere, it apparently has come down and it's affecting the environment.
You see all the trees that are dead and in the process of dying right now, flashing out. And you can see the really brown ones that have just flashed out with the needle still on them. And it's progressing throughout the whole hillside. Even on the top slope, if you look to the back slope up there, I mean, they're flashing out everywhere.
That's right.
You don't have any kind of uniform green. You have just various colors of dead and dying. That's all you have.
What a thought that we're standing here at this point in history dealing with this madness. Maybe 2 years from now, we won't even be able to stand here. It's been proven this is happening throughout this country and around the world. This is supposed to be Yosemite, a national treasure, World Heritage Site. You want to take a picture? What are you going to see?
Climate engineering operations are saturating our atmosphere with light-scattering particles that alters the light spectrum that reaches the surface of the planet. This in turn affects photosynthesis.
The sunlight that is going through this layer piggybacks the frequency of those toxins. When you're exposed to the sun, when there is that gray halo between you and the sunlight burns and it feels very, very unpleasant, and you end up feeling miserable at the end of the day. Whereas when the sun goes through a clear blue sky, you may get a sunburn if you stay there too long, but it's a pleasant warmth that you're getting.
We've been told that the ozone layer is recovering, but that's a blatant lie. That's a cover-up. We're being bombarded with very dangerous levels of UV radiation, not just UVA and UVB, but UVC, the last spectrum of UV radiation before X-ray. So if we have 10.5 milliwatts per centimeter squared and we subtract the UVA, which I believe was 4.3 milliwatts per centimeter squared, we end up with about 60% of the total incoming UV is UVB, and that's simply off the charts. It is well known and understood in the science community that climate engineering operations would damage the ozone layer. But because the science community is betraying the human race and the entire web of life, they are not admitting that these operations have long since been deployed and are destroying the ozone layer. And when people feel how intense the sun feels in their skin, it is not their imagination. Extreme UV radiation is killing plankton. Plankton populations globally are plummeting. At this point in time, plankton is the single largest oxygen producer on the planet. No plankton, no people. Climate engineering from every conceivable direction is pounding the nails into our collective coffins.
In order to try to understand what was going on with the bombardment of nanoparticles, I decided to test lichens. Now, environmentally, lichens only get their nutrients and energy from the air and from rain. I tested and found that the most common element found was aluminum. There are a number of things that happen with aluminum saturation. Rather than acidic, it creates a basic formula in the soil which favors some plants and destroys others. In root systems, it can have a significant impact on their absorption and nutrient uptake.
The pH of the rain is 10 times more alkaline than it used to. The pH of the soil is 10 times more alkaline than it used to. For acid soils, they've gone neutral. It hasn't gone much past neutral, but is still 10 times more alkaline than it should be.
The soil has been the most destructed entity on the planet. We know that the soil contains tens of thousands of different species of microbes, bacteria, fungi, helminths, viruses, that are absolutely essential for the soil to produce food that actually nurtures us.
A lot of work has been done on tobacco and wheat and rye grasses, that germination of seeds in the presence of nanomaterials, of aluminum oxide for instance, significantly stunts root growth and leads to a plant that has been compromised. Most of the oxygen that's being produced by our planet is produced by things like trees and algae and cyanobacteria. All of these life forms are negatively impacted by exposure to nanoparticles of aluminum oxide and other nanomaterials.
You see smaller plants in front with the very discolored leaves. That's fungal infection. As the bioavailable metals are killing soil microbes, changing soil pHs, changing forest soil compositions, it has a horrific domino effect. Whole specimens, mature specimens of manzanita flash out stone dead black from fungal infection.
In the geoengineering mix, these are nanoplastic particles that are spiked with aluminum, with titanium, with strontium. Basically, the oceans are covered with a sheet of plastic. The oceans can no longer evaporate the water that the atmosphere needs to keep the earth blue and green like it used to be. The algae in the ocean depend on a lot of sunlight in order to produce oxygen. And they can't do their job anymore because they're not getting the light they need. In the last 2 or 3 years, ever increasing articles about nanoplastics appearing in chicken, in fruit, in vegetables, and also in our human body. Every animal that we eat now is full of these nanoplastic particles. And these are certainly not animals that have swum in the ocean. These are land-based animals. They've never eaten a plastic bag, and yet they're accumulating these nanoparticles. And the only possible source of that is the air that they breathe.
At this late hour on our planet, when we most need alternative forms of energy, climate engineering is dramatically diminishing all 3 primary forms of alternative energy. Climate engineering is disrupting the hydrological cycle, i.e. the rain cycle, causing protracted droughts all over the world, which is dramatically reducing hydropower production. Climate engineering, by its very description, solar radiation management to block the sun, greatly diminishes solar power output all over the world. Climate engineering also reduces wind power because it reduces convection. Atmospheric layers of reflective particles reduce convection, which in turn reduces wind, which reduces evaporation, again decreasing potential power output for all other forms of energy. Many are absolutely overwhelmed when they are introduced to the climate engineering issue. They try to convince themselves that our government would never do this to us, but such a conclusion doesn't hold up to available data. All official air testing agencies generally test for 10 microns, 2.5 microns at best. Atmospheric testing has proven that climate engineering aerosols are unimaginably smaller, in the 20 to 100 nanometer range. The smaller the particle, the more deadly it is to inhale. Available science studies prove that human hearts and human brains now have not just millions, but billions of nanoparticles lodged in them. Most know that bee colonies are collapsing. What most don't know is that insect populations in general are also collapsing all over the world. Bees are dying of symptoms resembling Alzheimer's and dementia in human beings because they're packed full of aluminum. Why aren't the beekeepers acknowledging this? Why isn't this fact a headline all over the globe?
To suit our convenience, we clear other large areas of natural life in order to build towns and cities. Our homes, stores, and factories, clustered closely together, are easy marks continually tempting invasion by the insect enemies. Our only answer is to wage constant battle with the bugs. This must be intelligent, organized, well-planned warfare,
We must fight our insect enemies with every weapon our imagination and science can devise. Chemical warfare is quick death to our enemies, whether used on a small scale or on a large scale. Vast areas can be treated in a short time, an outstanding advantage in our warfare against the insects.
What's it like for an insect to be poisoned by a crop-dusting aircraft? Don't we all know? Is there any difference whatsoever between crop-dusting insects and the global climate engineering spray operations that have long since contaminated our entire planet and every breath we take? How can we avoid this? Answer, we can't.
You can make very high quality, and do this in just a jet in a very simple way, make high quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. And implementation decisions will be risk to risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it.
It's very good to have research on new applications of technology that are beneficial, but it should be balanced at the same time it's developed with the study of the adverse effects, if there are any.
Now, as it happens, the Air Force conducted a study starting in 1993. It was called In Vitro Toxicity of Aluminum Nanoparticles in Rat Alveolar Macrophages. That's a real fancy way of saying testing the effect of aluminum nanoparticles on the white blood cells in the little air sacs in your lung, the alveoli. And what they found in this 8-year study was that these particles, when you're exposed to them long enough, it suppresses the ability of your white blood cells to defend you from airborne infections coming into your lungs. And so essentially by breathing this material in, your immune system is dramatically suppressed.
If we can't breathe, if we can't inhale without sucking up highly toxic, bioavailable, bioaccumulative particulates that lodge in our systems like a plaque, elements like aluminum, barium, strontium, elements that are highly toxic in and of themselves, but when combined become exponentially more toxic.
70% of the nanoparticles that are already within us are introduced to our systems through just respiration. So we breathe them into our nose, the ethmoidal sinuses then collect them, they can migrate to our frontal lobe through the olfactory nerve, and there they can generate reactive oxygen species and cause brain damages of different type.
Everything we know at present suggests that generation of reactive oxygen species is the cause of aging, cause of almost every disease that we know. Certainly dementia, but other diseases as well. A lot of the nanoparticles, not all of them, but a lot of them have metal ions. Metal ions are potent generators of reactive oxygen species. When you have nanoparticles in the body, they are small enough so they go everywhere. There is no barrier to them in any part of the body. They cross the blood-brain barrier, they cross cell membranes.
They're even more reactive or can be more damaging than virus particles. We have natural defenses against viruses. We have no natural defenses against nanomaterials. And again, they never leave our system. They don't die, they're not cleared. We don't produce antibodies against them. So we are exposing humanity to a class of materials that will continue to damage biological tissue for the lifetime of that organism.
The Japanese developed a blood washing method called apheresis that was used for reducing cholesterol and fats from the blood. And then a brilliant German toxicologist came along and modified this procedure where he could not only wash out the blood, but also the plasma from the connective tissue, which is a much deeper look into the system. The entire blood volume and plasma volume is put through a filter system several times and filters out anything that's toxic. And with this method, it's the first time you can actually measure body burden, or how much is in the entire body. And as it turns out, nanonized aluminum is by a factor of roughly 100 times, 94 to 120 times more prevalent than any other toxin, nanonized aluminum. And we know that we absorb aluminum very poorly by eating it. That cannot be the possible route how we get toxic. The only way that we can get these high levels of aluminum is through inhalation or through injection. This was a big wake-up call.
To let the evolvement of a program impact my grandchildren, even my children, not necessarily the immediate years for myself, is a very personal concern to know how it will flow down through the elements of the family.
I often find that those who question actions of the government often don't want to get involved until it directly affects them. If you look up into the sky, this is directly affecting you. If you have a family, your children, your wife, your husband, your extended family members, your animals, this is directly affecting all of us.
How can so many claim that governments and militaries around the world would not spray chemical and biological agents on populations when there are literally hundreds of historically documented cases of such operations occurring in recent decades? Many biological warfare experiments were officially used to test the range and dispersal patterns of aerosol, particulates, and biological agents. In the United States alone, by 1977, 239 open-air biological tests had been conducted over unknowing U.S. populations. Tests were conducted throughout the 20th century, many of which took place concurrently with the covert ramp-up of climate engineering operations. We are expected to believe that this experimentation was benign and not connected to the climate engineering operations, just as is the case with the ever-increasing exposure to microwave transmissions all over the world. Many of what we are told are only cellular communication towers have power supply inputs that are 10 times larger than what is needed for communications purposes. The compounding synergistic toxicity of these operations is accumulating inside all of us.
What makes us sensitive to Wi-Fi and to the electromagnetic radiation in general is the metals in our body. And we never used to have aluminum in our mitochondria. The aluminum in our mitochondria makes the inside of the mitochondria resonant with Wi-Fi, and they start heating up, and it starts destroying the mitochondrial DNA at a very, very rapid rate. And so it's really the synergy of the metals dispersed in our body and the Wi-Fi making our body a resonant antenna with the Wi-Fi environment. And of course, you know, we're going now from 3 or 4G to 5G with the ever increasing amplitude of energy that's delivered into our systems.
This is one of those life or death choices. But we're not just talking about my life or your life. We're talking about something that is killing the fundamental living system on the planet.
We are bathed now in a soup that is comprised of nanoized aluminum. Glyphosate forms 6 different salts with aluminum and works as a carrier to carry the aluminum deep into our brains. And the only other missing thing there was to open the cell walls, open the blood-brain barrier, is the ever-increasing exposure to radio waves. Half of the people listening to this talk will die with or of dementia. And the main cause of dementia is the nanoized aluminum particles. There's somebody behind the scene orchestrating that with the perfect understanding of the human condition and of toxicology, and brought the 3 things together that will, in a very, very rapid period of time, we're talking 6-7 years from here on, cause major destruction of the human nervous system that could be stopped at a switch. We could have a clean world tomorrow.
We need to come together for all of humanity to address this issue. And I think that the only way to do that at this point is a legal approach, and to present all evidence on both sides, the evidence that we are collecting as independent scientists and the evidence that already exists in those laboratories where these materials are produced and deployed. colleagues of mine, they don't really accept this yet. They're starting to, because I've shared some of the data that we've collected, but most of them will ignore it and do call it beat-up conspiracy theories. Well, those learned people are ignorant of the facts. And so my call to action is, don't ignore things anymore. We have to address this issue. It's on our doorstep, it's in our skies, it's in our children. We have to do something.
If the ongoing global climate engineering, weather warfare operations are not brought to light and to a halt, allowing the planet to respond to the damage done, it will never be able to find a new equilibrium, an equilibrium that may yet allow it to sustain life into the future. Exposing and halting climate engineering operations is the great imperative. They are disrupting virtually the entire web of life.
I think we need to enlist the support of commercial airline pilots, as well as calling back and bringing these subjects up with our House and Senate members in the U.S. Congress. I think it's going to take that kind of action to get this geoengineering exposed, find out what's behind it and why they are doing this.
In my life, I have friends, family, wonderful people who are trying to stay within the official reality on the theory that they'll be safer. And the reality is, if you look at where this thing is going, better we deal with it now. It's like cancer, it's only going to get worse.
The data is what's going to change people's mind. So you need to be able to draw it out, get the reports available, and get publicity on what the conclusions are so that people believe it. It's not just someone raising a subject that has no validity. It's based on scientific data that demands changes.
We've gotten to the point where the mystery is so expensive, spiritually, psychologically, financially, legally, that the time has come to say is, who's really doing this and why are they behaving this way?
And I often wonder, do any of those people, behind the scenes, fearing reprisal, are they looking into this? There is data out there. Who's going to bring it forward?
We are rapidly running out of time to take care of this problem. That's what makes it so critical. Yeah, and I can only hope that in my lifetime, we'll have a resolution of this and we can fix it. I'd really like to see the planet stay, the life on the planet stay anyway.
How do we stop climate engineering? I'm asked this question so often. The only way forward in this fight, the only way we can expose and halt climate engineering is from the inside out. With a critical mass of awareness, a level of awareness so vast that it causes a shockwave around the world, so that populations all over the world know what their governments have done to them without their knowledge or consent. A level of awareness so vast that our military brothers and sisters and their families understand what they are really a part of, literally self-extermination. We must reach a critical mass of awareness. It is the only way we can expose and halt climate engineering processes, and this effort will take all of us.
You cannot change anything when you are dead. When you are dead, it's always gone. So as long as you are alive, do something, I would say.
I do trust human ingenuity and human intelligence, and I think we still have a chance, but things are far more serious than the general public is aware of. The song is going to be over very soon if you don't turn things around.
We have a system full of great pain and great suffering and great poverty, and people sort of walking around in the dark playing bumper cars. It doesn't have to be. And so part of what has me so optimistic is I know what's possible. I know that what we have now is tiny compared to what's possible. So now's the time to figure out what's going on and why.
Now, our only chance is to stop interfering with Earth's life support systems, to expose and halt climate engineering once and for all, allow the planet to respond to the damage done to it on its own. Climate engineering is not a cure. Climate engineering is a curse, even worse than the disease it claims to treat. Time is not on our side. The sand in the hourglass is running out at blinding speed. Please, make your voice heard. Make every day count.